the desire elemental and its tendency to seek for the lower, coarser physical vibrations, recognizing quite clearly that its consciousness, its like and dislikes, are not his own. He has himself created it and should not become a slave to it, but learn to control it and realize himself as apart from it. This matter will be further considered in Chapter 12. 3. The mental life. Our third and last factor which affects the astral body during ordinary waking consciousness is the mental life. The mental activities have the most far-reaching effects on the astral body for two reasons. 1. Because lower mental matter, manas, is so inextricably linked with astral matter, that it is almost impossible for most people to utilize one without the other, i.e., few people can think without at the same time feeling, or feel without at the same time, to some extent, thinking. 2. Because the organization and control of the astral body rest with the mind. This is an example of the general principle that each body is built up by consciousness working in the plane next above it. Without the creative power of thought, the astral body cannot be organized. Every impulse sent by the mind to the physical body has to pass through the astral body, and produces an effect on it also. Further, as astral matter is far more responsive to thought vibrations than is physical, the effect of mental vibrations on it is proportionately greater than on the physical body. Consequently, a controlled, trained, and developed mind tends also to bring the astral body under control and to develop it. When, however, the mind is not actively controlling the astral body, the latter, being peculiarly susceptible to the influence of passing thought currents, is perpetually receiving these stimuli from without, and eagerly responding to them. So far, we have dealt with the general effects produced on the astral body, during ordinary life, by the nature of the physical, emotional, and mental life. We have now to deal, but in general outline only, with the use of the special faculties of the astral body itself, during the waking consciousness. The nature of these faculties, and their connection with the various chakrams in the astral body, we have already described in Chapter 5. By means of the powers of astral matter itself, developed through the agency of the chakrams, a man is enabled not only to receive vibrations from etheric matter, transmitted through the astral body to his mind, but also to receive impressions direct from the surrounding matter of the astral world, these, of course, being also similarly transmitted through the mental body to the real man within. But in order to receive impressions in this manner direct from the astral world, the man must learn to focus his consciousness in his astral body, instead of, as is usually the case, in his physical brain. In the lower types of men, or desire, is still emphatically the most prominent feature, though the mental development has also proceeded to some extent. The consciousness of such men is centered in the lower part of the astral body, their life being governed by sensations connected with the physical plane. That is the reason why the astral body forms the most prominent part of the aura in the undeveloped men. An ordinary man of our own race is also still living almost entirely in his sensations, although the higher astral is coming into play, but still, for him, the prominent question which guides his conduct is not what is right or reasonable to do, but simply what he himself desires to do. The more cultured and developed are beginning to govern desire by reason, that is to say, the center of consciousness is gradually transferring itself from the higher astral to the lower mental. Slowly as the man progresses, it moves up further still, and the man begins to be dominated by principle rather than by interest and desire. The student will recollect that humanity is still in the fourth round, which should naturally be devoted to the development of desire and emotion, yet we are engaged in the unfolding of intellect, which is to be the special characteristic of the fifth round. That this is so is due to the immense stimulus given to our evolution by the descent of the Lords of the Flame from Venus, and by the work of the adepts, who have preserved for us that influence and steadily sacrificed themselves in order that we might make the better progress. It should also be recollected that, in the smaller cycle of races, the fifth root race is working at the mind-body, whereas the fourth root race is more especially concerned with the astral body. In spite of the fact that, in the vast majority of cases the center of consciousness is located in the astral body, most men are quite unaware of the fact, knowing nothing at all about the astral body or its uses. They have behind them the traditions and customs of a long series of lives in which the astral faculties have not been used, yet all the time those faculties have been gradually and slowly growing inside a shell, somewhat as a chick grows inside the egg. Hence a very large number of people have astral faculties, of which they are entirely unconscious, in reality very near the surface, so to speak, and it's probable that in the near future, as these matters become more widely known and understood, in great numbers of cases these latent faculties will break through, and astral powers will then become far more common than they are today. The shell spoken of above is composed of a great mass of self-centered thought in which the ordinary man is almost hopelessly entombed. This applies also, perhaps with even greater force, to the sleep life, with which we shall deal in the next chapter. We spoke above of focusing the consciousness in the astral body. The consciousness of man can be focused in only one vehicle at a time, though he may be simultaneously conscious through the others in a vague way. A simple analogy may be taken from ordinary physical sight. If the finger be held up before the face, the eyes can be so focused as to see the finger perfectly. At the same time the distant background can also be seen, though imperfectly, because it is out of focus. In a moment the focus can be changed so that the background is seen perfectly, but the finger, now out of focus, only dimly and vaguely. Precisely in the same way, if a man who has developed astral and mental consciousness focuses himself in the physical brain, as in ordinary life, he will see perfectly the physical bodies of people, and at the same time he will see their astral and mental bodies, but only somewhat dimly. In far less than a moment he can change the focus of his consciousness so that he sees the astral fully and perfectly, but in that case he will see the mental and physical bodies also, but not in full detail. The same thing is true of the mental sight and of the sight of higher planes. Thus in the case of a highly developed man, whose consciousness has already developed even beyond the causal, higher mental, body, so that he is able to function freely on the Buddhic plane, and has also a measure of consciousness upon the Atmic plane, the center of consciousness lies between the higher mental and the Buddhic plane. The higher mental and the higher astral are in him much more developed than their lower parts, and though he still retains his physical body, he holds it merely for the convenience of working in it, and not in any way because his thoughts and desires are fixed there. Such a man has transcended all karma which could bind him to incarnation, and his physical body is therefore retained in order that it may serve as an instrument for the forces of the higher planes to reach down even to the physical plane. Chapter 9. Sleep Life. The real cause of sleep would appear to be that the bodies grow tired of one another. In the case of the physical body, not only every muscular exertion, but also every feeling and thought, produce certain slight chemical changes. A healthy body is always trying to counteract these changes, but it never quite succeeds whilst the body is awake. Consequently, with every thought, feeling, or action there is a slight, almost imperceptible loss, the cumulative effect of which eventually leaves the physical body too exhausted to be capable of further thought or work. In some cases even a few moments of sleep will be sufficient for recuperation, this being effected by the physical elemental. In the case of the astral body, it very soon becomes tired of the heavy labor of moving the particles of the physical brain, and needs a considerable period of separation from it to enable it to gather strength to resume the irksome task. On its own plane, however, the astral body is practically incapable of fatigue, since it has been known to work incessantly for 25 years without showing signs of exhaustion. Although excessive and long-continued emotion tires a man very quickly in ordinary life, it is not the astral body which becomes fatigued, but the physical organism through which the emotion is expressed or experienced. Similarly with the mental body. When we speak of mental fatigue, it is in reality a misnomer, for it is the brain, not the mind, that is tired. There is no such thing as fatigue of the mind. When a man leaves his body in sleep, or in death, the pressure of the surrounding astral matter, which really means the force of gravity on the astral plane, immediately forces other astral matter into the astrally empty space. Such a temporary astral counterpart is an exact copy, so far as arrangement is concerned, of the physical body, but nevertheless it has no real connection with it, and could never be used as a vehicle. It is merely a fortuitous concurrence of particles, drawn from any astral matter of a suitable kind that happens to be at hand. When the true astral body returns, it pushes out this other astral matter without the slightest opposition. This is clearly one reason why extreme care should be exercised as to the surroundings in which a man sleeps, for, if those surroundings are evil, astral matter of an objectionable type may fill the physical body while the man's astral body is absent, leaving behind influences which cannot but react unpleasantly upon the real man when he returns. When a man goes to sleep, his higher principles in their astral vehicle withdraw from the physical body, the dense body and the etheric body remaining by themselves on the bed, the astral body floating in the air above them. In sleep, then, a man is simply using his astral body instead of his physical. It is only the physical body that is asleep, not necessarily the man himself. Usually the astral body, thus withdrawn from the physical, will retain the form of the physical body, so that the person is readily recognizable to anyone who knows him physically. This is due to the fact that the attraction between the astral and the physical particles, continued all through physical life, sets up a habit or momentum in the astral matter, which continues even while it is temporarily withdrawn from the sleeping physical body. For this reason, the astral body of a man who is asleep will consist of a central portion corresponding to the physical body, relatively very dense, and a surrounding aura, relatively much rarer. In the case of a very undeveloped man, such as a savage, he may be nearly as much asleep as his physical body, because he is capable of very little definite consciousness in his astral body. He is also unable to move away from the immediate neighborhood of the sleeping physical body, and if an attempt were made to draw him away in his astral body, he would probably awake in his physical body in terror. His astral body is a somewhat shapeless mass, a floating wreath of mist, roughly ovoid in shape, but very irregular and indefinite in outline. The features and shape of the inner form, the dense astral counterpart of the physical body, are also vague, blurred and indistinct, but always recognizable. A man of this primitive type has been using his astral body, during waking consciousness, sending mind currents through the astral to the physical brain. But when, during sleep, the physical brain is inactive, the astral body, being undeveloped, is incapable of receiving impressions on its own account, and so the man is practically unconscious, being unable to express himself clearly through the poorly organized astral body. The centers of sensation in it may be affected by passing thought forms, and he may answer in it to stimuli that rouse the lower nature. But the whole effect given to the observer is one of sleepiness and vagueness, the astral body lacking all definite activity and floating idly, inchoate, above the sleeping physical form. In a quite unevolved person, therefore, the higher principles, i.e., the man himself, are almost as much asleep as the physical body. In some cases the astral body is less lethargic, and floats dreamily about on the various astral currents, occasionally recognizing other people in a similar condition, and meeting with experiences of all sorts, pleasant and unpleasant, the memory of which, hopelessly confused and often travestied into a grotesque caricature of what really happened, see Chapter 10 on Dreams, will cause the man to think next morning what a remarkable dream he has had. In the case of a more evolved man, there is a very great difference. The inner form is much more distinct and definite, a closer reproduction of the man's physical appearance. Instead of the surrounding mist-wreath, there is a sharply defined ovoid form preserving its shape unaffected amidst all the varied currents which are always swirling around it on the astral plane. A man of this type is by no means unconscious in his astral body, but is quite actively thinking. Nevertheless, he may be taking very little more notice of his surroundings than the savage. Not because he is incapable of seeing, but because he is so wrapped up in his own thought that he does not see, though he could do so if he chose. Whatever may have been the thoughts engaging his mind during the past day, he usually continues them when he falls asleep, and he is thus surrounded by so dense a wall of his own making that he observes practically nothing of what is going on outside. Occasionally a violent impact from without, or even some strong desire of his own from within, may tear aside this curtain of mist and permit him to receive some definite impression. But even then the fog would close in again almost immediately, and he would dream on unobservantly as before. In the case of a still more developed man, when the physical body goes to sleep, the astral body slips out of it, and the man is then in full consciousness. The astral body is clearly outlined and definitely organized, bearing the likeness of the man, and the man is able to use it as a vehicle far more convenient than the physical body. The receptivity of the astral body has increased, until it is instantly responsive to all the vibrations of its plane, the fine as well as the coarser, but in the astral body of a very highly developed person there would, of course, be practically no matter left capable of responding to coarse vibrations. Such a man is wide awake, is working far more actively, more accurately, and with greater power of comprehension, than when he was confined in the denser physical vehicle. In addition, he can move about freely and with immense rapidity to any distance, without causing the least disturbance to the sleeping physical body. He may meet and exchange ideas with friends, either incarnate or discarnate, who happen to be equally awake on the astral plane. He may meet people more evolved than himself, and receive from them warning or instruction, or he may be able to confer benefits on those who know less than himself. He may come into contact with non-human entities of various kinds. See chapters 20 and 21 on astral entities. He will be subject to all kinds of astral influences, good or evil, strengthening or terrifying. He may form friendships with people from other parts of the world. He may give or listen to lectures. If he is a student, he may meet other students and, with the additional faculties which the astral world gives, he may be able to solve problems which presented difficulties in the physical world. A physician, for example, during the sleep of the body, may visit cases in which he is especially interested. He may thus acquire new information, which may come through as a kind of intuition to his waking consciousness. In a highly evolved man, the astral body, being thoroughly organized and vitalized, becomes as much the vehicle of consciousness on the astral plane as the physical body is on the physical plane. The astral world being the very home of passion and emotion, those who yield themselves to an emotion can experience it with a vigor and a keenness mercifully unknown on earth. Whilst in the physical body most of the efficiency of an emotion is exhausted in transmission to the physical plane, but in the astral world the whole of the force is available in its own world. Hence it is possible in the astral world to feel far more intense affection or devotion than is possible in the physical world. Similarly, an intensity of suffering is possible in the astral world which is unimaginable in ordinary physical life. An advantage of this state of affairs is that in the astral world all pain and suffering are voluntary and absolutely under control. Hence life there is much easier, for the man who understands. To control physical pain by the mind is possible, but exceedingly difficult, but in the astral world anyone can in a moment drive away the suffering caused by a strong emotion. The man has only to exert his will, when the passion straightway disappears. This assertion sounds startling, but it is nevertheless true, such being the power of will and mind over matter. To have attained full consciousness in the astral body is to have already made a considerable amount of progress. When a man has also bridged over the chasm between astral and physical consciousness, day and night no longer exist for him, since he leads a life unbroken in its continuity. For such a man, even death, as ordinarily conceived, has ceased to exist, since he carries that unbroken consciousness not only through night and day, but also through the portals of death itself, and up to the end of his life upon the astral plane, as we shall see later when we come to deal with the after-death life. Traveling in the astral body is not instantaneous, but it is so swift that space and time may be said to be practically conquered, for although a man is passing through space, it is passed through so rapidly that its power to divide is nearly non-existent. In 2 or 3 minutes a man might move round the world. Any fairly advanced and cultured man among the higher races of mankind has already consciousness fully developed in the astral body, and is perfectly capable of employing it as a vehicle, though in many cases he does not do so, because he has not made the definite effort which is at first necessary, until the habit becomes established. The difficulty with the ordinary person is not that the astral body cannot act, but that for thousands of years that body has been accustomed to being set in motion only by impressions received through the physical vehicle, so that men do not realize that the astral body can work on its own plane and on its own account, and that the will can act upon it directly. People remain unawake astrally because they get into the habit of waiting for the familiar physical vibrations to call out their astral activity. Hence they may be said to be awake on the astral plane, but not in the least to the plane, and consequently they are conscious of their surroundings only very vaguely, if at all. When a man becomes a pupil of one of the masters, he is usually at once shaken out of his somnolent condition on the astral plane, fully awakened to the realities around him on that plane, and set to learn from them and to work among them, so that his hours of sleep are no longer a blank, but are filled with active and useful occupation, without in the least interfering with the healthy repose of the tired physical body. In Chapter 28 on Invisible Helpers we shall deal more fully with carefully planned and organized work in the astral body. Here it may be stated that even before that stage is reached, a great deal of useful work may be and is constantly being done. A man who falls asleep with the definite intention in his mind of doing a certain piece of work will assuredly go and attempt to carry out his intention as soon as he is freed from his physical body in sleep. But, when the work is completed, it is likely that the fog of his own self-centered thoughts will close round him once more, unless he has accustomed himself to initiate fresh lines of action when functioning apart from the physical brain. In some cases, of course, the work chosen is such as to occupy the whole of the time spent in sleep, so that such a man would be exerting himself to the fullest extent possible, so far as his astral development permits. Every one should determine each night to do something useful on the astral plane, to comfort someone in trouble, to use the will to pour strength into a friend who is weak or ill, to calm someone who is excited or hysterical, or to perform some similar service. Some measure of success is absolutely certain, and if the helper observes closely, he will often receive indications in the physical world of definite results achieved. There are 4 ways in which a man may be awakened to self-conscious activity in his astral body. 1. By the ordinary course of evolution, which though slow, is sure. 2. By the man himself, having learnt the facts of the case, making the requisite steady and persistent effort to clear away the mist from within and gradually overcome the inertia to which he is accustomed. In order to do this the man should resolve before going to sleep to try when he leaves the body to awaken himself and see something or do some useful work. This, of course, is merely hastening the natural process of evolution. It is desirable that the man should first have developed common sense and moral qualities, this for 2 reasons. First, lest he may misuse such powers as he may acquire. Second, lest he be overwhelmed by fear in the presence of forces which can neither understand nor control. 3. By some accident, or by unlawful use of magical ceremonies, he may so rend the veil that it can never wholly be closed again. Instances of this are to be found in A Bewitched Life by H. P. Blavatsky, and in Zanoni by Lord Bulwer-Lytton. 4. A friend may act from without upon the closed shell surrounding the men and gradually arouse the men to higher possibilities. This, however, would never be done unless the friend were quite sure that the men to be awakened possessed the courage, devotion, and other qualifications necessary for useful work. But the need of helpers on the astral plane is so great that every aspirant may be certain that there will not be a day's delay in arousing him as soon as he is seen to be ready. It may be added that when even a child has been awakened on the astral plane, the development of the astral body would proceed so rapidly that he would very soon be in a position upon that plane but little inferior to that of the awakened adult, and would, of course, be much in advance, so far as usefulness is concerned, of the wisest man who was as yet unawakened. But unless the go expressing himself through the child body possessed the necessary qualification of a determined yet loving disposition, and had clearly manifested it in his previous lives, no occultist would take the very serious responsibility of awakening him on the astral plane. When it is possible to arouse children in this way, they often prove most efficient works on the astral plane, and throw themselves into this work with a whole-souled devotion which is beautiful to see. Also, while it is comparatively easy to waken a man on the astral plane, it is practically impossible, except by a most undesirable use of mesmeric influence, to put him to sleep again. Sleeping and waking life are thus seen to be in reality but one. During sleep we are aware of that fact, and have the continuous memory of both, i.e., astral memory includes the physical, though, of course, the physical memory by no means always includes the memory of the astral experiences. The phenomenon of sleepwalking, somnambulism, may apparently be produced in several distinct ways. 1. The ego may be able to act more directly upon the physical body during the absence of the mental and astral vehicles. In cases of this nature a man might be able, for example, to write poetry, paint pictures, etc., which would be far beyond his ordinary powers when awake. 2. The physical body may be working automatically, and by force of habit, uncontrolled by the man himself. Instances of this occur where servants rise in the middle of the night and light a fire or attend to other household duties to which they are accustomed, or where the sleeping physical body carries out to some extent the idea dominant in the mind before falling to sleep. 3. An outside entity, incarnate or discarnate, may seize the body of a sleeping man and use it for his own ends. This would be most likely to happen with a person who was mediumistic, i.e., whose bodies are more loosely joined together than usual and therefore more readily separable. With normal people, however, the fact that the astral body leaves the physical body during sleep does not open the way to obsession, because the ego always maintains a close connection with his body and he would quickly be recalled to it by any attempt that might be made upon it. 4. A directly opposite condition may also produce a similar result. When the principles or bodies fit more tightly than usual, the man, instead of visiting a distant place in his astral body only, would take his physical body along as well, because he is not wholly dissociated from it. 5. Somnambulism is probably also connected with the complex problem of the various layers of consciousness in man, which under normal circumstances are unable to manifest themselves. Closely akin to sleep life is the condition of trance, which but the sleep state, artificially or abnormally induced. Mediums and sensitives readily pass out of the physical body into the astral body, usually unconsciously. The astral body can then exercise its functions, such as that of traveling to a distant place, gathering impressions there from surrounding objects and bringing them back to the physical body. In the case of a medium, the astral body can describe these impressions by means of the entranced physical body, but, as a rule, when the medium comes out of the trance, the brain does not retain the impressions thus made on it, no trace being left in the physical memory of the experiences acquired. Occasionally, but rarely, the astral body is able to make a lasting impression on the brain, so that the medium is able to recollect the knowledge acquired during trance. Chapter 10. Dreams. Consciousness and activity in the astral body are one thing. The memory in the brain of that astral consciousness and activity are a totally different matter. The existence or the absence of physical memory in no way affects the consciousness on the astral plane, nor the ability to function in the astral plane with perfect ease and freedom. It is, in fact, not only possible, but also by no means uncommon, for a man to function freely and usefully in his astral body during the sleep of the physical body, and yet to return to the physical body without the slightest memory of the astral work upon which he has been engaged. The break in consciousness between the astral and the physical life is due either to undevelopment of the astral body, or to the want of an adequate etheric bridge between the astral and the dense physical matter of the bodies. This bridge consists of the closely woven web of atomic matter, through which the vibrations have to pass, and which causes a moment of unconsciousness, like a veil, between sleeping and waking. The only way in which memory of the astral life can be brought through into the physical brain is by sufficient development of the astral body and by an awakening of the etheric chakrams, one function of which is to bring forces from the astral to the etheric. In addition, there must be active functioning of the pituitary body, which focuses the astral vibrations. Sometimes, on awakening, there is a feeling that something has been experienced of which no memory remains. The feeling indicates that there has been astral consciousness, though the brain is insufficiently receptive to receive the record. At other times the man in his astral body may succeed in making a momentary impression on the etheric double and the dense body, resulting in a vivid memory of the astral life. This is sometimes done deliberately when something occurs which the man feels that he ought to remember on the physical plane. Such a memory usually vanishes quickly and cannot be recovered. Efforts to recover the memory, by setting up strong vibrations in the physical brain, still further overpower the more delicate astral vibrations, and consequently render success even more impossible. There are some events, too, which make such a vivid impression upon the astral body that they become impressed upon the physical brain by a kind of repercussion. See page 242. In other cases, a man may succeed in impressing new knowledge on the physical brain, without being able to convey also the memory of where or how that knowledge was gained. Instances of this, common to most people, occur where solutions of problems, previously insoluble, suddenly arise in the consciousness, or where light is suddenly thrown onto questions previously obscure. Such cases may be taken to indicate that progress is being made with the organization and functioning of the astral body, although the physical body is still only partially receptive. In cases where the physical brain does respond, there are vivid, reasonable, and coherent dreams, such as occur to many people from time to time. Few people, when in the astral body, care whether the physical brain remembers or not, and 9 out of 10 much dislike returning to the body. In coming back to the physical body from the astral world there is a feeling of great constraint, as though one were being enveloped in a thick, heavy cloak. The joy of life on the astral plane is so great that physical life in comparison with it seems no life at all. Many regard the daily return to the physical body as men often do their daily journey to the office. They do not positively dislike it, but they would not do it unless they were compelled. Eventually, in the case of highly developed and advanced persons, the etheric bridge between the astral and the physical worlds is constructed, and then there is perfect continuity of consciousness between the astral and the physical lives. For such people life ceases to be composed of days of remembrance and nights of oblivion, and becomes instead, a continuous whole, year after year, of unbroken consciousness. Occasionally, a man who has normally no memory of his astral life, may unintentionally, through an accident, or illness, or intentionally by certain definite practices, bridge over the gap between astral and physical consciousness, so that from that time onwards his astral consciousness will be continuous, and his memory of his sleep life therefore be perfect. But, of course, before this could take place, he must already have developed full consciousness in the astral body. It is merely the rending of the veil between the astral and physical that is sudden, not the development of the astral body. The dream life may be considerably modified as a direct result of mental growth. Every impulse sent by the mind to the physical brain has to pass through the astral body, and, as astral matter is far more responsive to thought vibrations than is physical matter, it follows that the effects produced on the astral body are correspondingly greater. Thus, when a man has acquired mental control, i.e., has learned to dominate the brain, to concentrate, and to think as and when he likes, a corresponding change will take place in his astral life, and, if he brings the memory of that life through into the physical brain, his dreams will become vivid, well-sustained, rational, even instructive. In general, the more the physical brain is trained to answer to the vibrations of the mental body, the more is the bridging of the gulf between waking and sleeping consciousness facilitated. The brain should become more and more the obedient instrument of the man, acting under impulses from his will. The dreaming of ordinary events does not interfere with astral work, because the dreaming takes place in the physical brain, while the real man is away attending to other matters. It does not really matter what the physical brain does, so long as it keeps itself free from undesirable thoughts. Once a dream is started, its course cannot usually be changed, but the dream life can be controlled indirectly to a considerable extent. It is especially important that the last thought on sinking to sleep should be a noble and elevating one, as this strikes the keynote which largely determines the nature of the dreams which follow. An evil or impure thought attracts evil and impure influences and creatures, which react on the mind and astral body and tend to awaken low and earthly desires. On the other hand, if a man falls asleep with his thoughts fixed on high and holy things, he will automatically draw round him elementals created by similar efforts of others, and consequently his dreams will be lofty and pure. As we are dealing in this book mainly with the astral body, and phenomena closely associated with it, it is not necessary to attempt to deal exhaustively with the somewhat large subject of dream consciousness. Nevertheless, in order to show the proper setting of the part which the astral body plays in the dream life, it will be useful to give a very brief outline of the main factors operative in producing dreams. For a detailed study of the whole matter, the student is referred to that excellent textbook, Dreams by C.W. Leadbeater, from which the following facts are extracted. The factors concerned in the production of dreams are: 1. The lower physical brain, with its infantile semi-consciousness, and its habit of expressing every stimulus in pictorial form. 2. The etheric part of the brain, through which sweeps a ceaseless procession of disconnected pictures. 3. The astral body, palpitating with the wild surgings of desire and emotion. 4. The ego, in the causal body, who may be in any state of consciousness, from almost complete insensibility to perfect command of his faculties. When a man goes to sleep, his ego withdraws further within himself, and leaves his various bodies more free than usual to go their own way. These separate bodies, 1. Are much more susceptible of impressions from without than at other times, and, 2. Have a very rudimentary consciousness of their own. Consequently, there is ample reason for the production of dreams, as well as for confused recollections in the physical brain of the experiences of the other bodies during sleep. Such confused dreams may thus be due to 1. A series of disconnected pictures and impossible transformations produced by the senseless automatic action of the lower physical brain. 2. A stream of casual thought which has been pouring through the etheric part of the brain. 3. The ever-restless tide of earthly desire, playing through the astral body and probably stimulated by astral influences. 4. An imperfect attempt at dramatization by an undeveloped ego. 5. A mingling of several or all of these influences. We will briefly describe the principal elements in each of these kinds of dreams. 1. Physical brain dreams. When in sleep the ego, for the time, resigns control of the brain, the physical body still has a certain dim consciousness of its own, and in addition there is also the aggregate consciousness of the individual cells of the physical body. The grasp of the physical consciousness over the brain is far feebler than that of the ego over the brain, and consequently purely physical charges are capable of affecting the brain to a very much greater extent. Examples of such physical changes are irregularity in the circulation of the blood, indigestion, heat and cold, etc. The dim physical consciousness possesses certain peculiarities. 1. It is to a great extent automatic. 2. It seems unable to grasp an idea except in the form in which it is itself an actor. Consequently, all stimuli, whether from within or from without, are immediately translated into perceptual images. 3. It is incapable of grasping abstract ideas or memories, as such, but at once transforms them into imaginary percepts. 4. Every local direction of thought becomes for it an actual spatial transportation, i.e., a passing thought of China would transport the consciousness instantly in imagination to China. 5. It has no power of judging the sequence, value, or objective truth of the pictures that appear before it. It takes them all just as it seems them, and never feels surprised at anything which may happen, however incongruous or absurd. 6. It is subject to the principle of association of ideas, and consequently images, unconnected except by the fact that they represent events which happened near to one another in time, are apt to be thrown together in inextricable confusion. 7. It is singularly sensitive to the slightest external influences, such as sounds or touches, and 8. It magnifies and distorts them to an almost incredible degree. The physical brain thus is capable of creating sufficient confusion and exaggeration to account for many, but by no means all, dream phenomena. 2. Etheric brain dreams. The etheric brain is even more sensitive during the sleep of the body than it is during ordinary waking consciousness to influences from outside. Whilst the mind is actively engaged, the brain thereby being fully employed, it is practically impervious to the continual impingement of thought from without. But the moment the brain is left idle, the stream of inconsequent chaos begins to pour through it. In the vast majority of people, the thoughts which flow through their brains are in reality not their own thoughts at all, but fragments cast off by other people. Consequently, in sleep life especially, any passing thought which finds something congruous to itself in the brain of a sleeper is seized upon by that brain and appropriated, thus starting a whole train of ideas. Eventually these fade away and the disconnected, purposeless stream begins flowing through the brain again. A point to notice is that, since in the present state of the world's evolution there are likely to be more evil thoughts than good ones floating around, a man with an uncontrolled brain is open to all sorts of temptation which mind and brain control might have spared him. Even when these thought currents are shut out, by the deliberate effort of another person, from the etheric brain of a sleeper, that brain does not remain completely passive, but begins slowly and dreamily to evolve pictures for itself from its store of past memories. 3. Astral dreams. These are simply recollection in the physical brain of the life and activities of the astral body during the sleep of the physical body, to which reference has already been made in the preceding pages. In the case of a fairly well-developed person, the astral body can travel without discomfort to considerable distances from its physical body, can bring more or less definite impressions of places which it may have visited, or of people whom it may have met. In every case the astral body, as already said, is ever intensely impressionable by any thought or suggestion involving desire or emotion, though the nature of the desires which most readily awaken a response in it will, of course, depend on the development of the person and the purity or otherwise of his astral body. The astral body is at all times susceptible to the influences of passing thought currents, and, when the mind is not actively controlling it, it is perpetually receiving these stimuli from without, and eagerly responding to them. During sleep it is even more readily influenced. Consequently, a man who has, for example, entirely destroyed a physical desire, which he may previously have possessed for alcohol, so that in waking life he may feel even a definite repulsion for it, may yet frequently dream that he is drinking, and in that dream experience the pleasure of its influence. During the day, the desire of the astral body would be under the control of the will, but when the astral body was liberated in sleep, it escaped to some extent from the domination of the ego, and, responding probably to outside astral influence, its old habit reasserted itself. This class of dream is probably common to many who are making definite attempts to bring their desire nature under the control of the will. It may also happen that a man may have been a drunkard in a past life and still possesses in his astral body some matter drawn thereinto by the vibrations caused in the permanent atom by the drunkenness. Although this matter is not vivified in this life, yet in dreams, the control of the ego being weak, the matter may respond to drink vibrations from without and the man dreams that he drinks. Such dreams, once understood, need not cause distress, nevertheless they should be regarded as a warning that there is still present the possibility of the drink craving being reawakened. Ego dreams, much as the nature of the astral body changes as it develops, still greater is the change of the ego, or real man, that inhabits it. Where the astral body is nothing but a floating wreath of mist, the ego is also almost as much asleep as his physical body, being blind to the influences of his own higher plane, and even if some idea belonging to it should manage to reach him, since he has little or no control over his lower bodies, he will be unable to impress the experience on the physical brain. Sleepers may be at any stage from that of complete oblivion up to that of full astral consciousness. And it must be recollected, as already said, that even though there may be many important experiences on the higher planes, the ego may nevertheless be unable to impress them upon the brain, so that there is either no physical memory at all, or only a most confused memory. The principal characteristics of the consciousness and experiences of the ego, whether or not they be remembered in the brain, are as follows. 1. The ego's measure of time and space are so entirely different from that which he uses in waking life that it is almost as though neither time nor space existed for him. Many instances are known where in a few moments of time, as we measure it, the ego may have experiences which appear to last for many years, event after event happening in full and circumstantial detail. 2. The ego possesses the faculty, or the habit, of instantaneous dramatization. Thus a physical sound or a touch may reach the ego, not through the usual nerve mechanism, but directly, a fraction of a second before even it reaches the physical brain. That fraction of a second is sufficient for the ego to construct a kind of drama or series of scenes leading up to and culminating in the event which awakens the physical body. The brain confuses the subjective dream and the objective event, and therefore imagines itself to have actually lived through the events of the dream. This habit, however, seems to be peculiar to the ego which, so far as spirituality is concerned, is still comparatively undeveloped. As the ego develops spiritually, he rises beyond these graceful sports of his childhood. The man who has attained continuous consciousness is so fully occupied with higher plane work that he devotes no energy to this dramatization, and consequently this class of dream ceases for him. 3. The ego possesses also to some extent the faculty of prevision, being sometimes able to see in advance events which are going to happen, or rather which may happen unless steps are taken to prevent them, and to impress the same on the physical brain. Many instances are recorded of such prophetic or warning dreams. In some cases the warning may be heeded, the necessary steps taken, and the foreseen result either modified or entirely avoided. 4. The ego, when out of the body during sleep, appears to think in symbols. An idea, which down here would require many words to be expressed, is perfectly conveyed to him by a single symbolical image. If such a symbolic thought is impressed upon the brain, and remembered in waking consciousness, the mind may itself translate it into words. On the other hand, it may come through merely as a symbol, untranslated, and so may cause confusion. In dreams of this nature, it seems that each person usually has a system of symbology of his own. Thus water may signify approaching trouble, pearls may be a sing of tears, and so forth. If a man wishes to have useful dreams, i.e., to be able to reap in his waking consciousness the benefit of what his ego may learn during sleep, there are certain steps he should take to bring about this result. First, it is essential that he should form the habit of sustained and concentrated thought during ordinary waking life. A man who has absolute control of his thoughts will always know exactly what he is thinking about, and why. He will also find that the brain, thus trained to listen to the promptings of the ego, will remain quiescent when not in use, and will decline to receive or respond to casual currents from the surrounding ocean of thought. The men will thus be more likely to receive influences from the higher planes, where insight is keener and judgment truer than they can ever be on the physical plane. It should scarcely be necessary to add that the man should also be complete master of at least his lower passions. By a very elementary act of magic, a man may shut out from his etheric brain the rush of thoughts which impinge upon it from without. To this end, he should, when lying down to sleep, picture his aura, and will strongly that its outer surface shall become a shell to protect him from outside influences. The auric matter will obey his thought, and form the shell. This step is of appreciable value towards the desired end. The great importance of fixing the last thought, before falling to sleep, on high and noble things, has already been mentioned. It should be practiced regularly by those who wish to bring their dreams under control. It may be useful here to add the Hindu terms for the 4 states of consciousness. Jagrat is the ordinary waking consciousness. Svapna is the dream consciousness, working in the astral body, and able to impress its experiences upon the brain. Sushupti is the consciousness working in the mental body, and not able to impress its experiences on the brain. Turiya is a state of trance, the consciousness working in the buddhic vehicle, being so far separated from the brain that it cannot readily be recalled by outer means. These terms, however, are used relatively, and vary according to the context. Thus, in one interpretation of Jagrat, The physical and astral planes are combined, the 7 subdivisions corresponding to the 4 conditions of physical matter, and the 3 broad divisions of astral matter mentioned on page 148. For further elucidation, the student is referred to an Introduction to Yoga, by Annie Besant, page 16, and also to A Study in Consciousness, where waking consciousness is defined as that part of the total consciousness which is working through the outermost vehicle. Chapter 11. Continuity of Consciousness. As we have seen, for a man to pass in unbroken consciousness from one vehicle to another, example, from the physical to the astral, or vice versa, it is a requisite that the links between the bodies should be developed. Most men are not conscious of these links, and the links are not actively vivified, being in a condition similar to that of rudimentary organs in the physical body. They have to be developed by use, and are made to function by the man fixing his attention upon them and using his will. The will sets free and guides Kundalini, but unless the preliminary purification of the vehicles is first thoroughly accomplished, Kundalini is a destructive instead of a vivifying energy. Hence the insistence, by all occult teachers, on the necessity of purification before true yoga is practiced. When a man has rendered himself fit to be helped in vivifying the links, such assistance will inevitably come to him as a matter of course, from those who are ever seeking opportunities to aid the earnest and unselfish aspirant. Then, one day, the man will find himself slipping out of the physical body while he is wide awake, and without any break in consciousness he discovers himself to be free. With practice the passage from vehicle to vehicle becomes familiar and easy. The development of the links bridges the gulf between physical and astral consciousness, so that there is perfect continuity of consciousness. The student thus has not only to learn to see correctly on the astral plane, but also to translate accurately the memory of what he has seen from the astral to the physical brain, and to assist him in this he is trained to carry his consciousness without break from the, page 105, physical plane to the astral and mental and back again. For until that can be done there is always a possibility that his recollections may be partially lost or distorted during the blank intervals which separate his periods of consciousness on the various planes. When the power of bringing over the consciousness is perfectly acquired, the pupil will have the advantage of the use of all the astral faculties, not only while out of the body during sleep or trance, but also while fully awake in ordinary physical life. In order that the physical waking consciousness should include astral consciousness, it is necessary that the pituitary body should be further evolved, and that the 4th spirally in the atoms should be perfected. In addition to the method of moving the consciousness from one subplane to another, of the same plane, from, example, the astral atomic to the lowest subplane of the mental, there is also another line of connection which may be called the atomic shortcut. If we picture the atomic subplanes of astral, mental, etc., as lying side by side along a rod, the other subplanes may be pictured as hanging from the rod in loops, as though a piece of string were wound loosely round the rod. Obviously, then, to pass from one atomic subplane to another one could move by a shortcut along the rod, or down and up again through the hanging loops which symbolize the lower subplanes. The normal processes of our thinking come steadily down through the subplanes, but flashes of genius, illuminative ideas, come through the atomic subplanes only. There is also a third possibility connected with the relation of our planes with the cosmic planes, but this is too abstruse to be dealt with in a work which purports to deal only with the astral plane and its phenomena. Merely to obtain continuity of consciousness between the physical and the astral planes is, of course, quite insufficient in itself to restore memory of past lives. For this a much higher development is required, into the nature of which it is not necessary to enter. A man who has thus acquired complete mastery over the astral body may, of course, leave the physical body, not only during sleep, but at any time he chooses, and go to a distant place, etc. Mediums and sensitives project their astral bodies unconsciously, when they go into trance, but usually on coming out of trance there is no brain memory of the experiences acquired. Trained students are able to project the astral body consciously and to travel to great distances from the physical body, bringing back with them full and detailed memory of all the impressions they have gained. An astral body thus projected may be seen by persons who are sensitive or who may chance to be temporarily in an abnormal nervous condition. There are on record many cases of such astral visitations by a dying person near the time of death, the approach of dissolution having loosened the principles so as to make the phenomenon possible for people who were unable at any other time to perform the feat. See also page 50 for a similar phenomenon produced by a thought form. The astral body is also set free in many cases of disease. Inactivity of the physical body is a condition of such astral journeys. A man may, if he knows how to set about it, slightly densify his astral body by drawing into it, from the surrounding atmosphere, particles of physical matter, and thus materialize sufficiently to become physically visible. This is the explanation of many cases of apparitions, where a person, physically absent, has been seen by friends with their ordinary physical sight. Chapter 12. Death and the Desire Elemental. At death, the consciousness withdraws from the dense physical body into the etheric double for a short time, usually a few hours, and then passes into the astral body. Death thus consists of a process of unrobing or unsheathing. The ego, the immortal part of man, shakes off from itself, one after the other, its outer casings, first the dense physical, then the etheric double, then even the astral body, as we shall see later. In almost every case the actual passing away appears to be perfectly painless, even after a long illness involving terrible suffering. The peaceful look on the face of the dead is strong evidence in favor of this statement, and it is also borne out by the direct testimony of most of those who have been questioned on the point immediately after death. At the actual moment of death, even when death is sudden, a man sees the whole of his past life marshaled before him, in its minutest detail. In a moment he sees the whole chain of causes which been at work during his life. He sees and now understands himself as he really is, unadorned by flattery or self-deception. He reads his life, remaining as a spectator, looking down upon the arena he is quitting. The condition of consciousness immediately after the moment of death is usually a dreamy and peaceful one. There will also be a certain period of unconsciousness, which may last only for a moment, though often it is a few minutes, or several hours, and sometimes even days or weeks. The natural attraction between the astral counterpart and the physical body is such that, after death, the astral counterpart, from force of habit, retains its accustomed form. Consequently, a man's physical appearance will still be preserved after death almost unchanged. Almost, because in view of the fact that astral matter is very readily molded by thought, a man who habitually thinks of himself after death as younger than he actually was at the time of death will probably assume a somewhat younger appearance. Very soon after death, in most cases, an important change takes place in the structure of the astral body, owing to the action of the desire elemental. Much of the matter of the astral body is composed of elemental essence. See page 6. This essence is living, though not intelligent, and for the time it is cut off from the general mass of astral essence. Blindly, instinctively, and without reason it seeks its own ends and shows great ingenuity in obtaining its desires and in furthering its evolution. Evolution for it is a descent into matter, its aim being to become a mineral monad. Its object in life, therefore, is to get as near to the physical as it can, and to experience as many of the coarser vibrations as possible. It neither does or could know anything of the man in whose astral body it is for the time living. It desires to preserve its separate life, and feels that it can do so only by means of its connection with the man. It is conscious of the man's lower mind, and realizes that the more mental matter it can entangle with itself, the longer will be its astral life. On the death of the physical body, knowing that the term of its separated life is limited, and that the man's astral death will more or less quickly follow, in order to make the man's astral body last as long as possible, it rearranges its matter in concentric rings or shells, the coarsest outside. From the point of view of the desire elemental, this is good policy, because the coarsest matter can hold together longest and best stand friction. The rearranged astral body is called the yatana, or suffering body, in the case of a very evil man in whose astral body there is a preponderance of the coarsest matter. it is called the vrvam or strong body. The rearrangement of the astral body takes place over the surface of the counterpart of the physical body, not over the surface of the ovoid which surrounds it. The effect is to prevent the free and full circulation of astral matter which usually takes place in the astral body. In addition, the man is able to respond only to those vibrations which are received by the outermost layer of his astral body. The man is thus shut up, as it were, in a box of astral matter, being able to see and hear things of the lowest and coarsest plane only. Although living in the midst of high influences and beautiful thought forms, he would be almost entirely unconscious of their existence, because the particles of his astral body which could respond to those vibrations are shut in where they cannot be reached. Consequently, also, being able to sense only the coarsest matter in the astral bodies of other people, and being entirely unconscious of his limitations, he would assume that the person he was looking at possessed only the unsatisfactory characteristics which he would be able to perceive. Since he can see and feel only what is lowest and coarsest, the men around him appear to be monsters of vice. Under these circumstances it is little wonder that he considers the astral world a hell. The rearrangement of the astral body by the desire elemental does not in any way affect the recognizability of the form within the ovoid, though the natural changes which take place tend on the whole to make the form grow somewhat fainter and more spiritual in appearance as time passes on, for reasons which will presently be made clear. In course of time, the outermost shell or ring disintegrates, the man then becomes able to respond to the vibrations of the next higher level of the astral plane, and thus rises to the next subplane, and so on from one subplane to another. His stay on each subplane will, of course, correspond to the amount and activity of the matter in his astral body belonging to that subplane. When we speak of a man rising from one subplane to another, he need not necessarily move in space at all, he rather transfers his consciousness from one level to another. In the case of a man with a rearranged astral body, the focus of his consciousness shifts from the outer shell to the one next within it. The man thus gradually becomes unresponsive to the vibrations of one order of matter and answers instead to those of a higher order. Thus one world with its scenery and its inhabitants would seem to fade slowly away from his view, while another world would dawn upon him. As the shell usually disintegrates gradually, the man thus finds the counterparts of physical objects growing dimmer and dimmer, while thought forms become more and more vivid to him. If during this process he meets another man at intervals, he will imagine that man's character is steadily improving, merely because he has himself become able to appreciate the higher vibrations of that character. The rearrangement of the astral body, in fact, constantly interferes with a man's true and full vision of his friends at all stages of their astral life. This process of rearrangement of the astral body, which takes place with most people, can be prevented by the man setting his will to oppose it. In fact, anyone who understands the conditions of the astral plane should altogether decline to permit the rearrangement of the astral body by the desire elemental. The particles of the astral body will then be kept intermingled, as in life, and in consequence, instead of being confined to one astral subplane at a time, the man will be free of all the subplanes, according to the constitution of his astral body. The elemental, being afraid in its curious semi-conscious way, will endeavor to transfer its fear to the man who is jolting him out of the rearrangement, in order to deter him from doing so. Hence one reason why it is so useful to have knowledge of these matters before death. If the rearrangement, or shelling, has already occurred, it is still possible for the condition to be broken up by someone who wishes to help the man, and for the man to be thus set free to work on the whole astral plane, instead of being confined to one level. Chapter 13. After-death life, principles. It cannot be too strongly insisted that it is not found that any sudden change takes place in man at death. On the contrary, he remains after death exactly what he was before, except that he no longer has a physical body. He has the same intellect, the same disposition, the same virtues and vices. The loss of the physical body no more makes him a different man than with the removal of an overcoat. Moreover, the conditions in which he finds himself are those which his own thoughts and desires have already created for him. There is no reward or punishment from outside, but only the actual result of what he has himself done, and said, and thought, while living in the physical world. As we proceed with our description of the astral life after death, it will be recognized that the true facts correspond with considerable accuracy with the Catholic conception of purgatory and the Hades or underworld of the Greeks. The poetic idea of death as a universal leveler is a mere absurdity born of ignorance, for, as a matter of fact, in the vast majority of cases, the loss of the physical body makes no difference whatever in the character or intellect of the person, and there are therefore as many different varieties of intelligence among the so-called dead as among the living. This is the first and the most prominent fact to appreciate, that after death there is no strange new life, but a continuation, under certain changed conditions, of the present physical plane life. So much is this the case that when a man first arrives on the astral plane after physical death he by no means always knows that he is dead, and even when he does realize what has happened to him he does not always at first understand how the astral world differs from the physical. In some cases people consider the very fact that they are still conscious an absolute proof that they have not died, and this in spite of the much vaunted belief in the immortality of the soul. If a man has never heard of astral plane life before, he is likely to be more or less disturbed by the totally unexpected conditions in which he finds himself. Finally, he accepts these conditions, which he does not understand, thinking them necessary and inevitable. Looking out upon the new worlds, at the first glance he would probably see very little difference, and he would suppose himself to be looking upon the same world as before. As we have seen, each degree of astral matter is attracted by the corresponding degree of physical matter. If, therefore, we imagine the physical world to be struck out of existence, without any other change being made, we should still have a perfect replicate of it in astral matter. Consequently, a man on the astral plane would still see the walls, furniture, people, etc., to which he was accustomed, outlined as clearly as ever by the densest type of astral matter. If, however, he examined such objects closely he would perceive that all the particles were visibly in rapid motion, instead of only invisibly as on the physical plane. But, as few men observe closely, a man who dies often does not know at first that any change has come over him. Thus many, especially in Western countries, find it difficult to believe that they are dead, simply because they still see, hear, feel, and think. Realization of what has happened will probably dawn gradually, as the man discovers that though he can see his friends he cannot always communicate with them. Sometimes he speaks to them, and they do not seem to hear, he tries to touch them, and finds that he can make no impression upon them. Even then, for some time he may persuade himself that he is dreaming, for at other times, when his friends are asleep, they are perfectly conscious of him and talk with him as of old. By degrees the man begins to realize the differences between his present life and that which he lived in the physical world. For example, he soon finds that for him all pain and fatigue have passed away. He also finds that in the astral world desires and thoughts express themselves in visible forms, though these are composed mostly of the finer matter of the plane. As his life proceeds, these become more and more prominent. Moreover, though a man on the astral plane cannot usually see the physical bodies of his friends, yet he can and does see the physical bodies of his friends, and consequently knows their feelings and emotions. He will not necessarily be able to follow in detail the events of their physical life, but he would at once be aware of such feelings as love or hate, jealousy or envy, as these would be expressed through the astral bodies of his friends. Thus, although the living often suppose themselves to have lost the dead are never for a moment under the impression that they have lost the living. A man, in fact, living in his astral body after death is more readily and deeply influenced by the feelings of his friends in the physical world than when he was on earth, because he has no physical body to deaden his perceptions. A man on the astral plane does not usually see the whole astral counterpart of an object, but the portion of it which belongs to the particular subplane upon which he is at the time. Moreover, a man by no means always recognizes with any certainty the astral counterpart of a physical body even when he sees it. He usually requires considerable experience before he can clearly identify objects, and any attempt that he makes to deal with them is liable to be vague and uncertain. Examples of this are often seen in haunted houses, where stone-throwing, or vague, clumsy movements of physical matter take place. Frequently, not realizing that he is free from the necessity to work for a living, to eat, sleep, etc., a man after death may continue to prepare and consume meals, created entirely by his imagination, or even to build for himself a house in which to live. A case is recorded of a man who built for himself a house, stone by stone, each stone being separately created by his own thought. He might, of course, with the same amount of effort have created the whole house at once. He was eventually led to see that as the stones had no weight, the conditions were different from those obtaining in physical life, and so he was induced to investigate further. Similarly, a man new to the conditions of astral life may continue to enter and depart from a room by a door or window, not realizing that he can pass through the wall just as easily. For the same reason he may walk upon the earth when he might just as well float through the air. A man who has already during earth life acquainted himself, by reading or otherwise, with the general conditions of astral life, naturally finds himself after death on ground more or less familiar, and consequently he should not be at a loss to know what to do with himself. Even an intelligent appreciation of occult teaching on this subject, as experience has shown, is of enormous advantage to a man after death, while it is a considerable advantage for a man merely to have heard of the conditions of astral life, even though he may have regarded such teachings as one of many hypotheses, and may not have followed them up further. In the case of others, not so fortunately situated as to their knowledge of the astral world, their best plan is to take stock of their position, endeavor to see the nature of the life before them, and how they can make the best use of it. In addition, they would do well to consult some experienced friend. The condition of life referred to above constitute kamaloka, literally the place or world of kama or desire, the limbus of scholastic theology. In general terms, kamaloka is a region peopled by intelligent and semi-intelligent entities. It is crowded with many types and forms of living things, as diverse from each other as a blade of grass is different from a tiger is different from a man, there being, of course, many other entities living there besides deceased human beings, see chapters 19 to 21. It interpenetrates the physical world, and is interpenetrated by it, but, as the states of matter in the two worlds differ, they coexist without the entities of either world being conscious of those of the other. Only under abnormal circumstances can consciousness of each other's presence arise among the inhabitants of the two worlds. Kamaloka is thus not divided off as a distinct locality, but is separated off from the rest of the astral plane by the conditions of consciousness of the entities who belong to it, these entities being human beings, who have shaken off the dense and etheric bodies, but who have not yet disentangled themselves from kama, i.e., the passional and emotional nature. This state is also called predaloka, a preda being a human being who has lost his physical body, but is still encumbered with the vesture of his animal nature. The kamalokic condition is found on each subdivision of the astral plane. Many who die are at first in a condition of considerable uneasiness, and others of positive terror. When they encounter the thought forms which they and their kind have for centuries been making, thoughts of a personal devil, an angry and cruel deity, and eternal punishment, they are often reduced to a pitiable state of fear, and may spend long periods of acute mental suffering before they can free themselves from the fatal influence of such foolish and utterly false conceptions. It ought, however, in fairness to be mentioned that it is only among what are called Protestant communities that this terrible evil assumes its most aggravated form. The great Roman Catholic Church, with its doctrine of purgatory, approaches much more nearly to a true conception of the astral plane, and its devout members, at any rate, realize that the state in which they find themselves shortly after death is merely a temporary one, and it is their business to endeavor to raise themselves out of it as soon as may be by intense spiritual aspiration, while they accept any suffering which may come to them as necessary for the wearing away of the imperfections in their character, before they can pass to higher and brighter spheres. Thus we see that although men should have been taught by their religion what to expect, and how to live on the astral plane. In most cases this has not been done. Consequently, a good deal of explanation is needed regarding the new world in which they find themselves. But, after death, exactly as before it, there are few who attain to an intelligent appreciation of the fact of evolution and who, by understanding something of their position, know how to make the best of it. Today, large numbers of people, both living and dead, are engaged in looking after and helping those who have died in ignorance of the real nature of the after-death life. V. Chapter 28 on Invisible Helpers. Unfortunately, however, on the astral plane, as on the physical, the ignorant are rarely ready to profit by the advice or example of the wise. To a man who has, before he dies physically, already acquainted himself with the real conditions of life on the astral plane, one of the most pleasant characteristics of that life is its restfulness and complete freedom from those imperious necessities, such as eating and drinking, which burden physical life. On the astral plane a man is really free to do whatever he likes, and to spend his time as he chooses. As already indicated, a man who has died physically is steadily withdrawing into himself. The whole cycle of life and death may be likened to an ellipse, of which only the lowest portion passes into the physical world. During the first portion of the cycle, the ego is putting himself forth into matter. The central point of the curve should be a middle point in physical life, when the force of the ego has expended its outward rush and turns to begin the long process of withdrawal. The portion of the life after death spent on the astral plane is therefore definitely in the period of withdrawal back towards the ego. During the latter part of the physical life the man's thoughts and interests should be less and less directed towards merely physical matters. Similarly, during the astral life, he should pay less and less attention to the lower astral matter, out of which counterparts of physical objects are composed, and occupy himself with the higher matter, out of which desire and thought forms are made. It is not so much that he has changed his location in space, though this is partially true, see Chapter 14, as that he has moved the center of his interest. Hence the counterpart of the physical world which he has left gradually fades from his view, and his life becomes more and more a life in the world of thought. His desires and emotions still persist, and consequently, owing to the readiness with which astral matter obeys his desires and thoughts, the forms surrounding him will be very largely the expression of his own feelings, the nature of which mainly determines whether his life is one of happiness or of discomfort. Although we are not in this book dealing with that portion of the life after death which is spent in the heaven world, i.e., on the mental plane, nevertheless, in order to understand fully what is happening to the astral body on the astral plane, it is desirable to bear in mind that the astral life is largely an intermediate stage in the whole cycle of life and death, a preparation for the life on the mental plane. As we have seen, soon after physical death, the astral body is set free, expressed from the point of view consciousness, kama manas is set free. From this, that portion of lower manas, which is not inextricably entangled with kama, gradually frees itself, taking with it such of its experience as fit for assimilation by the higher mental body. Meanwhile, that portion of the lower manas which still remains entangled with kama, gives to the astral body a somewhat confused consciousness, a broken memory of the events of the life just closed. If the emotions and passions were strong, and the mental element weak, then the astral body will be strongly energized, and will persist for a considerable time on the astral plane. It will also show a considerable amount of consciousness, due to the mental matter entangled with it. If, on the other hand, the earth life just closed was characterized by mentality and purity rather than by passion, the astral body will be poorly energized, will be but a pale simulacrum of the man, and will disintegrate and perish comparatively rapidly. Thus each physical incarnation may be regarded as a putting of the ego, whose habitat is the higher part of the mental plane, outwards into the lower planes. The ego puts the soul out, as though it were an investment, and expects his investment to draw back added experience, which will have developed new qualities within him. Chapter 14. The After-Death Life, Particulars. In considering the conditions of a man's astral life, there are two prominent factors to be taken into account. 1. The length of time which he spends on any particular subplane. 2. The amount of his consciousness upon it. The length of time depends upon the amount of matter belonging to that subplane which he has built into his astral body during physical life. He will necessarily remain upon that subplane until the matter corresponding to it has dropped out of his astral body. During physical life, as we have already seen, the quality of the astral body which he builds for himself is directly determined by his passions, desires, and emotions, and indirectly by his thoughts, as well as by his physical habits, food, drink, cleanliness, continence, etc. A coarse and gross astral body, resulting from a coarse and gross life, will cause the man to be responsive only to lower astral vibrations, so that after death he will find himself bound to the astral plane during the long and slow process of the disintegration of the astral body. On the other hand, a refined astral body, created by a pure and refined life, will make the man unresponsive to the low and coarse vibrations of the astral world, and responsive only to its higher influences. Consequently, he will experience much less trouble in his post-mortem life, and his evolution will proceed rapidly and easily. The amount of consciousness depends upon the degree to which he has vivified and used the matter of the particular subplane in his physical life. If during earth life the animal nature was indulged and allowed to run riot, if the intellectual and spiritual parts were neglected or stifled, then the astral or desire body will persist for a long time after physical death. If, on the other hand, desire has been conquered and bridled during earth life, if it has been purified and trained into subservience to the higher nature, then there will be little to energize the astral body, and will quickly disintegrate and dissolve away. The average man, however, has by no means freed himself from all lower desires before death, and consequently it takes a long period of more or less fully conscious life on the various subplanes of the astral plane to allow the forces which he has generated to work themselves out, and thus release the higher ego. The general principle is that when the astral body has exhausted its attractions to one level, the greater part of its grosser particles fall away, and it finds itself in affinity with a somewhat higher state of existence. Its specific gravity, as it were, is constantly decreasing, and so it steadily rises from the dense to the lighter strata, pausing only when it is exactly balanced for a time. To be upon any given subplane in the astral world is to have developed sensitiveness of those particles in the astral body which belong to that subplane. To have perfect vision on the astral plane means to have developed sensitiveness in all particles of the astral body, so that all the subplanes are simultaneously visible. A man who has led a good and pure life, whose strongest feelings and aspirations have been unselfish and spiritual, will have no attractions to the astral plane, and will, if entirely left alone, find little to keep him upon it, or to awaken him into activity even during the comparatively short period of his stay. His earthly passions have been subdued during physical life, and the force of his will having been directed into higher channels, there is but little energy of lower desire to be worked out on the astral plane. Consequently, his stay there will be very short, and most probably he will have little more than a dreamy half-consciousness, until he sinks into the sleep during which his higher principles finally free themselves from the astral body, and enter upon the blissful life of the heaven world. Expressed more technically, during physical life Manas has purified Kama with which it was interwoven, so that after death all that is left of Kama is a mere residuum, easily shaken off by the withdrawing ego. Such a man therefore would have little consciousness on the astral plane. It is quite possible that a man might, as a result of his previous incarnations, possess a good deal of coarse astral matter in his astral body. Even if he has been so brought up, and has so conducted his life, that he has not vivified that coarse matter, and although much of it may have dropped out and been replaced by finer materials, yet there may be quite a good deal left. Consequently, the man would have to remain on a low level of the astral plane for some time, until in fact the coarse matter had all dropped out. But, as the coarse matter would not be vivified, he would have little consciousness and would practically sleep through the period of his sojourn there. There is a point known as the critical point between every pair of substates of matter. Ice may be raised to a point at which the least increment of heat will change it into liquid, water may be raised to a point at which the least increment of heat will change it into vapor. And so each substate of astral matter may be carried to a point of fineness at which any additional refinement would transform it into the next higher substate. If a man has done this for every substate of matter in his astral body, so it is purified to the last possible degree of delicacy, then the first touch of disintegrating force shatters its cohesion and resolves it into its original condition, leaving him free at once to pass on to the next subplane. His passage through the astral plane will thus be of inconceivable rapidity, and he will flash through the plane practically instantaneously to the higher state of the heaven world. Every person after death has to pass through all the subplanes of the astral plane, on his way to the heaven world. But whether or not he is conscious on any or all of them, and to what extent, will depend upon the factors enumerated. For these reasons, it is clear that the amount of consciousness a man may possess on the astral plane, and the time he may spend there in his passage to the heaven world, may vary within very wide limits. There are some who pass only a few hours or days on the astral plane, others remain there for many years, or even centuries. For an ordinary person 20 or 30 years on the astral plane after death is a fair average. An exceptional case is that of Queen Elizabeth, who had so intense a love for her country that she has only quite recently passed into the heaven world, having spent the time since her death in endeavoring, until recently almost without success, to impress upon her successors her ideas of what ought to be done for England. Another notable example was that of Queen Victoria, who passed very rapidly through the astral plane and into the heaven world, her swift passage being undoubtedly due to the millions of loving and grateful thought forms which were sent to her, as well as to her inherent goodness. The general question of the interval between earth lives is complicated. It is possible here to touch briefly only on the astral portion of those intervals. For further details the student is referred to The Inner Life, Volume 2, pages 458 to 474. Three principal factors have to be taken into account. 1. The class of ego. 2. The mode of individualization. 3. The length and nature of the last earth life. The following table gives a general average of the length of the astral life, as determined by the class of ego. Moon men, first order. Individualized in moon chain average length of present type round no. Astral life. Advanced egos, many of these are taking continuous 5 years, an ego may incarnation so that even pass through for them the rapidly in question of intervals unconsciously 5 between lives does not arise. General tendency is men distinguish towards a longer astral in art, science or life, especially in the religion case of artists and religious men. Country gentlemen and professional 20 to 25 years men upper middle class 25 years class of ego. Moon men, second order bourgeoisie 40 years. Moon animal men skilled workers 40, on middle level. Moon animal, first class unskilled laborers 40 to 50, on lower levels drunkards and 40 to 50, usually on sixth moon animals, second class unemployables level moon animals, third class lowest of humanity 5, on seventh level. A certain difference is produced by the mode of individualization, but this difference is much less in proportion in the lower classes. Those individualized through intellect tend to take an interval between lives rather longer than that taken by those who individualized in other ways. Generally speaking, a man who dies young will have a shorter interval than one who dies in old age, but is likely to have a proportionately longer astral life, because most of the strong emotions which work themselves out in astral life are generated in the earlier part of the physical life. It must be recollected that in the astral world ordinary methods of time measurement scarcely apply. Even in physical life anxiety or pain will stretch a few hours almost indefinitely, and on the astral plane this characteristic is exaggerated 100-fold. A man on the astral plane can measure time only by his sensations. For a distortion of this fact has come the false idea of eternal damnation. We have thus seen that both, 1. The time spent, and 2. The amount of consciousness experienced, on each level of the astral plane depend very largely upon the kind of life the man has led in the physical world. Another factor of great importance is the man's attitude of mind after physical death. The astral life may be directed by the will, just as the physical life may be. A man with little willpower or initiative is, in the astral as in the physical world, very much the creature of the surroundings which he has made for himself. A determined man, on the other hand, can always make the best of his conditions and live his own life in spite of them. A man, therefore, does not rid himself of evil tendencies in the astral world, unless he definitely works to that end. Unless he makes definite efforts, he will necessarily suffer from his inability to satisfy such cravings as can be gratified only by means of a physical body. In process of time, the desires will wear themselves out and die down simply because of the impossibility of their fulfillment. The process, however, may be greatly expedited as soon as the man realizes the necessity of ridding himself of the evil desires which detain him, and makes the requisite effort. A man who is ignorant of the true state of affairs usually broods over his desires, thus lengthening their life, and clings desperately to the gross particles of astral matter as long as he can, because the sensations connected with them seem nearest to the physical life for which he still craves. The proper procedure for him, of course, is to kill out earthly desires and to withdraw into himself as quickly as possible. Even a merely intellectual knowledge of the conditions of astral life, and, in fact, of theosophical truths in general, is of inestimable value to a man in the after-death life. It is of the utmost importance that after physical death a man should recognize quite clearly that he is withdrawing steadily towards the ego, and that consequently he should disengage his thoughts as far as may be from things physical and fix his attention upon spiritual matters which will occupy him when, in due time, he passes from the astral plane into the mental or heaven world. By adopting this attitude he will greatly facilitate the natural disintegration of the astral body instead of unnecessarily and uselessly delaying himself upon the lower levels of the astral plane. Many people, unfortunately, refuse to turn their thoughts upwards, but cling to earthly matters with desperate tenacity. As time passes on, they gradually, in the normal course of evolution, lose touch with the lower worlds, but by fighting every step of the way they cause themselves much unnecessary suffering and seriously delay their upward progress. In this ignorant opposition to the natural course of things, the possession of a physical corpse is of assistance to a man, the corpse serving as a kind of fulcrum on the physical plane. The best remedy for this tendency is cremation, which destroys the link with the physical plane. A few typical examples of astral after-death life will best illustrate the nature and rationale of that life. An ordinary colorless man, neither specially good nor specially bad, is of course in no way changed by death, but remains colorless. Consequently, he will have no special suffering and no special joy. In fact, he may find life somewhat dull, because, having cultivated no particular interests during his physical life, he has none in his astral life. If during his physical life he had no ideas beyond gossip, sport, business, or dress, he will naturally, when these are no longer possible, be likely to find time hang heavily on his hands. A man, however, who has had strong desires of a low type, who has been, for example, a drunkard or a sensualist, will be in far worse case. Not only will his cravings and desires remain with him, it will be recollected that the centers of sensation are situated, not in the physical body, but in see page 24, but they will be stronger than ever, because their full force is expressed in astral matter, none of it being absorbed in setting in motion the heavy physical particles. Being in the lowest and most depraved condition of astral life, such a man seems often to be still sufficiently near to the physical to be sensitive to certain odors, though the titillation produced is only sufficient still further to excite his mad desires and tantalize him to the verge of frenzy. But, as he no longer possesses a physical body, through which alone his cravings can be allayed, he has no possibility of gratifying his terrible thirst. Hence the innumerable traditions of the fires of purgatory, found in nearly every religion, which are no inapt symbols for the torturing conditions described. Such a condition may last for quite a long time, since it passes away only by gradually wearing itself out. The rationale and automatic justice of the whole process is clear, the man has created his conditions himself, by his own actions, and determined the exact degree of their power and duration. Furthermore, it is the only way in which he can get rid of his vices. For, if he were to be reincarnated immediately, he would start his next life precisely as he finished the preceding one, i.e., a slave to his passions and appetites, and the possibility of his ever becoming master of himself would be immeasurably reduced. But, as things are, his cravings having worn themselves out, he will be able to commence his next incarnation without the burden of them, and his ego, having had so severe a lesson, is likely to make every possible effort to restrain its lower vehicles from again making a similar mistake. A confirmed drunkard will sometimes be able to draw round himself a veil of etheric matter, and thus partially materialize himself. He can then draw in the odor of the alcohol, but he does not smell it in the same sense as we do. Hence he is anxious to force others into the condition of drunkenness, so that he may be able partially to enter their physical bodies and obsess them, through their bodies being once more able to experience directly the tastes and other sensations for which he craves. Obsession may be permanent or temporary. As just mentioned, a dead sensualist may seize upon any vehicle he can steal in order to gratify his coarse desires. At other times a man may obsess someone as a calculated act of revenge. A case is recorded where a man obsessed the daughter of his enemy. Obsession can be best prevented or resisted by an exercise of willpower. When it occurs, it is almost always because the victim has in the first place voluntarily yielded himself to the invading influence, and his first step therefore is to reverse the act of submission. The mind should be set steadily against the obsession in determined resistance, realizing strongly that the human will is stronger than any evil influence. Such obsession is of course utterly unnatural and in the highest degree harmful to both parties. The effect of excessive tobacco smoking on the astral body after death is remarkable. The poison so fills the astral body that it stiffens under its influences and is unable to work properly or to move freely. For the time, the man is as though paralyzed, able to speak, yet debarred from movement, and almost entirely cut off from higher influences. When the poison part of his astral body wears away, he emerges from this unpleasant predicament. The astral body changes its particles, just as does the physical body, but there is nothing to correspond to eating and digesting food. The astral particles which fall away are replaced by others from the surrounding atmosphere. The purely physical cravings of hunger and thirst no longer exist there, but the desire of the glutton to gratify the sensation of taste, and the desire of the drunkard for the feelings which follow the absorption of alcohol, being both astral, still persist, and, as already stated, they may cause great suffering owing to the absence of the physical body through which alone they could be satisfied. Many myths and traditions exist, exemplifying the conditions described. One of them is that of Tantalus, who suffered from raging thirst, yet was doomed to see the water recede just as it was about to touch his lips. Another, typifying ambition, is that of Sisyphus, condemned to roll a heavy rock up a mountain, only see it roll down again. The rock represents ambitious plans which such a man continues to form, only to realize that he has no physical body with which to carry them out. Eventually he wears out his selfish ambition, realizes that he need not roll his rock, and lets it rest in peace at the bottom of the hill. Another story was that of Titius, a man who was tied to a rock, his liver being gnawed by vultures, and growing against as fast as it was eaten. This symbolized a man tortured by the gnawings of remorse for sins committed on earth. The worst that the ordinary man of the world usually provides for himself after death is a useless and unutterably wearisome existence, void of all rational interests, the natural sequel of a life wasted in self-indulgence, triviality, and gossip here on earth. The only things for which he craves are no longer possible to him, for in the astral world there is no business to be done, and, though he may have as much companionship as he wishes, society is now for him a very different matter, because all the pretensions upon which it is usually based in this world are no longer possible. Man thus makes for himself both his own purgatory and his own heaven, and these are not places but states of consciousness. Hell does not exist, it is only a figment of the theological imagination. Neither purgatory nor heaven can ever be eternal, for a finite cause cannot produce an infinite result. Nevertheless, the conditions of the worst type of men after death are perhaps best described by the word hell, though they are not everlasting. Thus, for example, it sometimes happens that a murdered is followed about by his victim, never being able to escape from his haunting presence. The victim, unless himself of a very base type, is wrapped in unconsciousness, and this very unconsciousness seems to add a new horror to the mechanical pursuit. The vivisector also has his hell, where he lives amid the crowding forms of his mutilated victims, moaning, quivering, howling. These are vivified, not by the animal souls, but by elemental life pulsing with hatred to the tormentor, rehearsing his worst experiments with automatic regularity, conscious of all their horror, and yet impelled to the self-torture by the habits set up during earth life. Such conditions are not produced arbitrarily, but are the inevitable results of causes set in operation by each person. Nature's lessons are sharp, but in the long run they are merciful, for they lead to the evolution of the soul, being strictly corrective and salutary. For most people the state after death is much happier than life upon earth. The first feeling of which the dead man is usually conscious is one of the most wonderful and delightful freedom. He has nothing to worry about, and no duties rest upon him, except those which he chooses to impose upon himself. Regarded from this point of view, it is clear that there is ample justification for the assertion that people physically alive, buried and cramped as they are in physical bodies, are in the true sense far less alive than those usually termed dead. The so-called dead are much more free and, being less hampered by material condition are able work far more effectively and to cover a wider field of activity. A man who, not having permitted the rearrangement of his astral body, is free of the entire astral world, does not find it inconveniently crowded, because the astral world is much larger than the surface of the physical earth, while its population is somewhat smaller. The average life of humanity in the astral world, see page 124, being shorter than the average in the physical. In addition to the dead, there are also, of course, on the astral plane about 1/3 of the living, who have temporarily left the physical body during sleep. Although the whole astral plane is open to any of its inhabitants who have not permitted the rearrangement of their astral bodies, yet the great majority remain near the surface of the earth. Passing to a higher type of man, we may consider one who has some interests of a rational nature, example, music, literature, science, etc. The need to spend a large proportion of each day in earning a living no longer existing, the man is free to do precisely what he likes, so long as it capable of realization without physical matter. In the astral life it is possible not only to listen to the grandest music but to hear far more of it than before, because there are in the astral world other and fuller harmonies than the relatively dull physical ears can hear. For the artist, all the loveliness of the higher astral world is open for his enjoyment. A man can readily and rapidly move from place to place and see the wonders of nature, obviously far more easily than he could ever do on the physical plane. If he is a historian or a scientist, the libraries and the laboratories of the world are at his disposal. His comprehension of natural processes will, page 132, be far fuller than ever before, because he can now see the inner as well as the outer workings, and many of the causes where previously he saw only the effects. In all these cases his delight is greatly enhanced, because no fatigue is possible, see page 82. A philanthropist can pursue his beneficent work more vigorously than ever before and under better conditions than in the physical world. There are thousands whom he can help, and with greater certainty of conferring real benefit. It is quite possible for any person upon the astral plane after death to set himself to study, and to acquire entirely new ideas. Thus, people may learn of theosophy for the first time in the astral world. A case is on record even of a person learning music there, though this is unusual. In general, life on the astral plane is more active than on the physical plane, astral matter being more highly vitalis than physical matter, and form being more plastic. The possibilities on the astral plane, both of enjoyment and of progress, are in every way much greater than those on the physical plane. But the possibilities are of a higher class, and it needs a certain amount of intelligence to take advantage of them. A man who has whilst on earth devoted the whole of his thought and energy solely to material things, is little likely to be able to adapt himself to more advanced conditions, as his semi-atrophied mind will not be strong enough to grasp the wider possibilities of the grander life. A man whose life and interests are of a higher type may be able to do more good in a few years of astral existence than ever he could have done in the longest physical life. Astral pleasures being so much greater than those of the physical world, there is danger of people being turned aside by them from the path of progress. But even the delights of the astral life do not present a serious danger to those who have realized a little of something higher. After death a man should try to, page 133, pass through the astral levels as speedily as possible, consistently with usefulness, and not yield to their refined pleasures any more than to those of the physical. Any developed man is in every way quite as active during astral life after death as during his physical life. He can unquestionably help or hinder his own progress and that of others quite as much after death as before, and consequently he is all the time generating karma of the greatest importance. In fact, the consciousness of a man living entirely in the astral world is usually much more definite than it has been during his sleep astral life, and he is correspondingly better able to think and act with determination, so that his opportunities of making good or bad karma are the greater. It may be said in general that man can make karma wherever his consciousness is developed, or wherever he can act or choose. Thus actions done on the astral plane may bear karmic fruit in the next earth life. On the lowest astral subplane a man, having other things to occupy his attention, concerns himself little with what takes place in the physical world, except when he haunts vile resorts. On the next subplane, the sixth, are found men who, whilst alive, centered their desires and thoughts chiefly in mere worldly affairs. Consequently, they still hover about the persons and places with which they were most closely associated while on earth, and may be conscious of many things in connection with these. They never, however, see physical matter itself, but always the astral counterpart of it. Thus, for example, a theater full of people has its astral counterpart, which is visible to astral entities. They would not, however, be able to see, as we see them, either the costumes or the expressions of the actors, and the emotions of the players, being not real but simulated, would make no impression on the astral plane. Those on the sixth subplane, which is on the surface of the earth, find themselves surrounded by the astral counterparts of physically existing mountains, trees, lakes, etc. On the next two subplanes, the fifth and fourth, this consciousness of physical affairs is also possible, though in rapidly diminishing degree. On the next two subplanes, the third and second, contact with the physical plane could be obtained only by a special effort to communicate through a medium. From the highest, the first subplane, even communication through a medium would be very difficult. Those loving on the higher subplanes usually provide themselves with whatever scenes they desire. Thus in one portion of the astral world men surround themselves with landscapes of their own creation, others accept ready-made the landscapes which have already been constructed by others. A description of the various levels or subplanes will be given in Chapter 16. In some cases men construct for themselves the weird scenes described in their various religious scriptures, manufacturing clumsy attempts at jewels growing on trees, seas of glass mingled with fire, creatures full of eyes within, and deities with 100 heads and arms. In what the spiritualists call the Summerland, people of the same race and the same religion tend to keep together after death just as they do during life, so that there is a kind of network of Summerlands over the countries to which belong the persons who have created them, communities being formed, differing as widely from each other as do similar communities on earth. This is due not only to natural affinity but also to the fact that barriers of language still exist on the astral plane. This principle applies, in fact, to the astral plane in general. Thus at spiritualist seances in Ceylon, it was found that the communicating entities were Buddhists, and that beyond the grave they had found their religious preconceptions confirmed, exactly as had, page 135, the members of various Christian sects in Europe. Men find on the astral plane not only their own thought forms, but those made by others, these, in some cases, being the product of generations of thought from thousands of people, all following along the same lines. It is not uncommon for parents to endeavor to impress their wishes on their children, e.g., with regard to some particular alliance on which their heart is set. Such an influence is insidious, an ordinary man being likely to take the steady pressure for his own subconscious desire. In many cases the dead have constituted themselves guardian angels to the living, mothers often protecting their sons, husbands their widows, and so on, for many years. In others cases a dead writer or musical composer may impress his ideas upon a writer or composer in the physical world, so that many books credited to the living are really the work of the dead. The person who actually executes the writing may be conscious of the influence, or may be entirely unconscious of it. One leading novelist has stated that his stories come to him he knows not whence, that they are in reality written not by him, but through him. He recognizes the state of affairs. There are probably many others in the same case who are quite unconscious of it. A doctor who dies often continues after death to take an interest in his patients, endeavoring to cure them from the other side, or to suggest to his successor methods of treatment which, with his newly acquired astral faculties, he sees would be useful. Whilst most ordinary, good people, who die natural deaths, are unlikely to be conscious of anything physical at all, as they sweep through all the lower stages before awakening to astral consciousness, yet some, even of these, may be drawn back into touch with the physical world by great anxiety about someone left behind. The grief of relatives and friends may also attract the attention of one who has passed to the astral plane, page 136, and tend to draw him down into touch with earth life again. This downward tendency grows with use and the man is likely to exert his will to keep in touch with the physical world. For a time his power of seeing earthly things will increase, but presently it will diminish, and then he will probably suffer mentally as he feels his power slipping from him. In many cases people not only cause themselves an immense amount of wholly unnecessary pain, but often also do serious injury to those for whom they mourn with intense and uncontrolled grief. During the whole period of the astral plane life, whether it be long or short, the man is within the reach of earth influences. In the cases just mentioned, the passionate sorrow and desires of friends on earth would set up vibrations in the astral body of the man who had died, and so reach and rouse his mind or lower manas. Thus aroused from his dreamy state to vivid remembrance of earth life, he may endeavor to communicate with his earth friends, possibly through a medium. Such an awakening is often accompanied by acute suffering, and in any even the natural process of the ego's withdrawal is delayed. Occult teaching does not for a moment counsel forgetfulness of the dead, but it does suggest that affectionate remembrance of the dead is a force which, if properly directed towards helping his progress towards the heaven world, and his passage through the intermediate state, might be of real value to him, whereas mourning is not only useless but harmful. It is with a true instinct that the Hindu religion prescribes its Shraddha ceremonies and the Catholic Church its prayers for the dead. Prayers, with their accompanying ceremonies, create elementals which strike against the Kamalokic entity's astral body, and hasten its disfiguration, thus speeding him on towards the heaven world. When, for example, a mass is offered with a definite intention of helping a dead person, that person will undoubtedly benefit by the downpouring of force. The strong thought about him inevitably attracts his attention, and when he is drawn to the church he takes part in the ceremony and enjoys a large share in its results. Even if he be still unconscious, the priest's will and prayer directs the stream of force towards the person concerned. Even the earnest general prayer or wish for the good of the dead as a whole, though likely to be vague and therefore less efficient than a more definite thought, has yet in the aggregate produced an effect whose importance it would be difficult to exaggerate. Europe little knows how much it owes to those great religious orders who devote themselves night and day to ceaseless prayer for the faithful departed. Chapter 15. The After-Death Life, Special Cases. There is practically no difference between the consciousness of a psychic after death and that of an ordinary person, except that the psychic, being probably more familiar with astral matter, will feel more at home in his new environment. To be psychic means to possess a physical body in some ways more sensitive than those of most people. Consequently, when the physical body is dropped, this inequality no longer exists. A sudden death, such as from an accident, need not necessarily affect the astral life in any way for the worse. At the same time, for most people, a more natural death is preferable, because the slow wasting away of the aged or the ravages of a long-continued illness are almost invariably accompanied by a considerable loosening and breaking up of the astral particles, so that when the man recovers consciousness upon the astral plane, he finds some, at any rate, of his principal work there already done for him. In most cases, when earth life is suddenly cut short by accident or suicide, the link between kama, desire, and prana, vitality, is not easily broken, and the astral body is consequently strongly vivified. The withdrawal of the principles from their physical encasement, owing to sudden death of any kind, has been aptly compared to the tearing of the stone out of an unripe fruit. A great deal of the grossest kind of astral matter still clings around the personality, which is consequently held in the seventh or lowest astral subplane. The mental terror and disturbance which sometimes accompany accidental death are, of course, page 139, very unfavorable preparation for astral life. In certain rare cases the agitation and terror may persist for some time after death. The victims of capital punishment, apart from the injury done to them by suddenly wrenching from the physical the astral body, throbbing with feelings of hatred, passion, revenge, and so forth, constitute a peculiarly dangerous element in the astral world. Unpleasant to society as a murderer in his physical body may be, he is clearly far more dangerous when suddenly expelled from the body, and, whilst society may protect itself from murderers in the physical body, it is at present defenseless against murderers suddenly projected onto the astral plane in the full flush of their passions. Such men may well act as the instigators of other murders. It is well known that murders of a particular kind are sometimes repeated over and over again in the same community. The position of the suicide is further complicated by the fact that his rash act has enormously diminished the power of the higher ego to withdraw its lower portion into itself, and therefore has exposed him to other and great dangers. Nevertheless, it must be remembered, as already said, that the guilt of suicide differs considerably according to circumstances, from the morally blameless act of Socrates through all degrees down to that of a wretch who commits suicide in order to escape the physical results of his own crimes, and, of course, the position after death varies accordingly. The karmic consequences of suicide are usually momentous, they are certain to affect the next life, and probably more lives than one. It is a crime against nature to interfere with the prescribed period appointed for living on the physical life. For every man has an appointed life term, determined by an intricate web of prior causes, i.e., by karma, and that term must run out its appointed sands, before the dissolution of the personality. The attitude of mind at the time of death determines the subsequent position of the person. Thus, there is a profound difference between one who lays down his life from altruistic motives and one who deliberately destroys his life from selfish motives, such as fear, etc. Pure and spiritually minded men, who are the victims of accident, etc., sleep out happily the term of their natural life. In other cases they remain conscious, often entangled in the final scene of earth life for a time, held in whatever region they are related to by the outermost layer of their astral body. Their normal camalochic life does not begin until the natural web of earth life is outspun, and they are vividly conscious of both their astral and physical surroundings. It must not for a moment, therefore, be supposed that because of the many superiorities of astral over physical life, a man is therefore justified in committing suicide or seeking death. Men are incarnated in physical bodies for a purpose which can be attained only in the physical world. There are lessons to be learnt in the physical world which cannot be learnt anywhere else, and the sooner we learn them the sooner we shall be free from the need to return to the lower and more limited life. The ego has to take much trouble in order to incarnate in a physical body, and also to live through the wearisome period of early childhood, during which he is gradually and with much effort gaining some control over his new vehicles, and therefore his efforts should not be foolishly wasted. In this respect, the natural instinct of self-preservation is one which should be obeyed, it being a man's duty to make the most of his earthly life and to retain it as long as circumstances permit. If a man, who has been killed suddenly, has led a low, brutal, selfish, and sensual life, he will be fully conscious on the 7 astral subplane, and is liable to develop into a terribly evil entity. Inflamed with appetites which he can no longer satisfy, he may endeavor to gratify his passions through a medium or any sensitive person who he can obsess. Such entities take a devilish delight in using all the arts of astral delusion to lead others into the same excesses in which they themselves indulged. From this class and from the Vitalist shells, see page 172, are drawn the tempters, the devils of ecclesiastical literature. The following is a strongly worded account of the victims of sudden death, whether suicides or killed by accident, when such victims are depraved and gross. Unhappy shades, if sinful and sensual, they wander about, until their death hour comes. Cut off in the full flush of earthly passions, which bind them to familiar scenes, they are enticed by opportunities which mediums afford to gratify them vicariously. They are the pishachas, the incubi and succubi of medieval times, the demons of thirst, gluttony, lust and avarice, elementaries of intensified craft, wickedness and cruelty, provoking their victims to horrid crimes, and reveling in their commission. Soldiers killed in battle do not quite come under this category, because, whether the cause for which they are fighting be any abstract right or wrong, they think it to be right, to them it is the call of duty, and they sacrifice their lives willingly and unselfishly. In spite of its horrors, therefore, war may nevertheless be a potent factor in evolution at a certain level. This, also, is the grain of truth in the idea of the Mohammedan fanatic that the man who dies fighting for the faith goes straight to a very good life in the next world. In the case of children dying young, it is unlikely that they will have developed much affinity for the lowest subdivisions of the astral world, and as a matter of experience they are seldom found on the lowest astral subplanes. Some people cling so desperately to material existence that at death their astral bodies cannot altogether separate from the etheric, and consequently they awaken still surrounded by etheric matter. Such persons are in a very unpleasant condition. They are shut out from the astral world by the etheric shell which surrounds them, and at the same time they are also, of course, shut off from ordinary physical life because they have no physical sense organs. The result is that they drift about, lonely, dumb and terrified, unable to communicate with entities on either plane. They cannot realize that if they would only let go their frenzied grasp on matter they would slip, after a few moments of unconsciousness, into the ordinary life of the astral plane. But they cling to their gray world, with their miserable half-consciousness, rather than sink into what they think complete extinction, or even the hell in which they have been taught to believe. In process of time the etheric shell wears out, and the ordinary course of nature reasserts itself in spite of their struggles. Sometimes in sheer desperation they recklessly let themselves go, preferring even the idea of annihilation to their present existence, with a result overwhelmingly and surprisingly pleasant. In a few cases, another astral entity may be able to help them by persuading them to let go their hold on what to them is life and sink out of it. In other cases, they may be so unfortunate as to discover a means of reviving to some extent their touch with physical life through a medium, though as a rule the medium's spirit guide very properly forbids them access. The guide is right in his action, because such entities, in their terror and need, become quite unscrupulous and would obsess and even madden a medium, fighting as a drowning man fights for life. They could succeed only if the ego of the medium had weakened his hold upon his vehicles by allowing the indulgence of undesirable thoughts or passions. Sometimes an entity may be able to seize upon a baby body, ousting the feeble personality for whom it was intended, or sometimes even to obsess the body of an animal, the fragment of the group soul which, to an animal, stands in the place of an ego, having a hold on the body less strong than that of an ego. This obsession may be complete or partial. The obsessing entity thus once more gets into touch with the physical plane, sees through the animal's eyes, and feels any pain inflicted upon the animal. In fact, So far as his own consciousness is concerned, he is the animal for the time being. A man who thus entangles himself with an animal cannot abandon the animal's body at will, but only gradually and by considerable effort, extending probably over many days. Usually he is set free only at the death of the animal, and even then there remains an astral entanglement to shake off. After the death of the animal, such a soul sometimes endeavors to obsess another member of the same herd, or indeed any other creature whom he can seize in his desperation. The animals most commonly seized upon seem to be the less developed ones, cattle, sheep, and swine. More intelligent creatures, such as dogs, cats, and horses, do not appear to be so easily dispossessed, though cases do occasionally occur. All obsessions, whether of a human or an animal/body, are an evil and a hindrance to the obsessing soul, as they temporarily strengthen his hold upon the material, and so delay his natural progress into the astral life, besides making undesirable karmic links. In the case of a man who, by vicious appetite or otherwise, forms a very strong link with any type of animal, his astral body shows animal characteristics, and may resemble in appearance the animal whose qualities had been encouraged during earth life. In extreme cases the man may be linked to the astral body of the animal and thus be chained as a prisoner to the animal's physical body. The man is conscious in the astral world, has his human faculties, but cannot control the animal body nor express himself through that body on the physical plane. The animal organism serves as a jailer, rather than as a vehicle, and, further, the animal soul is not ejected, but remains as the proper tenant of its body. Cases of this kind explain, at least partially, the belief often found in Oriental countries, that a man may under certain conditions reincarnate in an animal body. A similar fate may befall a man as he returns to the astral plane on his way to rebirth, and is described in Chapter 24 on rebirth. The class of person who is definitely held down to earth by anxiety is often termed earthbound. As St. Martin expressed it, such men are remainers, not returners, being unable thoroughly to tear themselves away from physical matter until some business is settled in which they have a special interest. We have already seen that after physical death the real man is steadily withdrawing himself from his outer bodies, and that, in particular, manas, or mind, endeavors to disentangle itself from kama, or desire. In certain rare cases, the personality, or lower man, may be so strongly controlled by kama that lower manas is completely enslaved and cannot disentangle itself. The link between the lower and the higher mental, the silver thread that binds it to the master, snaps in two. This is spoken of in occultism as the loss of the soul. It is the loss of the personal self, which has separated from its parent, the higher ego, and has thus doomed itself to perish. In such a case, even during earth life, the lower quaternary is wrenched away from the triad, i.e., the lower principles, headed by lower manas, are severed from the higher principles, atma, buddhi, and higher manas. The man is rent in twain, the brute has broken itself free, and it goes forth unbridled, carrying with it the reflections of that monastic light which should have been its guide through life. Such a creature, owing to its possession of mind, is more dangerous even than an unevolved animal. Though human in form, it is brute in nature, without sense of truth, love, or justice. After physical death, such an astral body is an entity of terrible potency, and is unique in this, that under certain rare conditions it can reincarnate in the world of men. With no instincts save those of the animal, driven only by passion, never even by emotion, with a cunning that no brute can rival, a wickedness that is deliberate, it touches ideal vileness, and is the natural foe of all normal human beings. A being of this class, which is known as an elementary, sinks lower with each successive incarnation, until, as the evil force gradually wears itself out, it perishes, being cut off from the source of life. It disintegrates, and thus as a separate existence is lost. From the point of view of the ego there has been no harvest of useful experience from that personality, the ray has brought nothing back, the lower life has been a total and complete failure. The word elementary has been employed by various writers in many different senses, but it is recommended that it be confined to the entity described above. Chapter 16. The Astral Plane. This chapter will be confined, so far as the complexities of the subject permit, to a description of the nature, appearance, properties, etc., of the astral plane or world. A later chapter will be devoted to an enumeration and description of the entities which live in the astral world. The intelligent student will recognize the extreme difficulty of giving in physical language an adequate description of the astral world. The task has been compared to that of an explorer of some unknown tropical forest being asked to give a full account of the country through which he has passed. The difficulties of describing the astral world are further complicated by two factors. 1. The difficulty of correctly translating from the astral to the physical plane the recollection of what has been seen, and 2. The inadequacy of physical plane language to express much of what has to be reported. One of the most prominent characteristics of the astral world is that it is full of continually changing shapes. We find there not only thought forms, composed of elemental essence and animated by a thought, but also vast masses of elemental essence from which continually shapes emerge and into which they again disappear. The elemental essence exists in hundreds of varieties on every subplane, as though the air were visible and were in constant undulating motion with changing colors like mother of pearl. Currents of thought are continually thrilling through this astral matter, strong thoughts persisting as entities for a long time, weak ones clothing themselves in elemental essence and wavering out again. We have already seen that astral matter exists in 7 orders of fineness, corresponding to the 7 physical grades of solid, liquid, gaseous, etc. Each of these 7 orders of matter is the basis of one of the 7 levels, subdivisions, or subplanes, as they are variously called, of the astral plane. It has become customary to speak of these 7 levels as being ranged one above the other, the densest at the bottom and the finest at the top, and in many diagrams they are actually drawn in this manner. There is a basis of truth in this method of representation, but it is not the whole truth. The matter of each subplane interpenetrates that of the subplane below it. Consequently, at the surface of the earth, all 7 subplanes exist together in the same space. Nevertheless, it is also true that the higher astral subplanes extend further away from the physical earth than the lower subplanes. A very fair analogy of the relation between the astral subplanes exists in the physical world. To a considerable extent liquids interpenetrate solids, e.g., water is found in soil, gases interpenetrate liquids, water usually contains considerable volumes of air, and so on. Nevertheless, it is substantially true that the bulk of the liquid matter of the earth lies in seas, rivers, etc., above the solid earth. Similarly, the bulk of gaseous matter rests above the surface of the water, and reaches much further out into space than either solid or liquid. Similarly with astral matter. By far the densest aggregation of astral matter lies within the limits of the physical sphere. In this connection it should be noted that astral matter obeys the same general laws as physical matter, and gravitates towards the center of the earth. The 7th or lowest astral subplane penetrates some distance into the interior of the earth, so that the entities living on it may find themselves actually within the crust of the earth. The 6th subplane is partially coincident with the surface of the earth. The 3rd subplane, which the spiritualists call the Summerland, extends many miles up into the atmosphere. The outer limit of the astral world extends nearly to the mean distance of the moon's orbit, so that at perigee the astral planes of the earth and moon usually touch one another, but not at apogee. The earth and moon are nearly 240,000 miles apart. Hence the name the Greeks gave to the astral plane, the sublunar world. It follows that at certain times of the month astral communication with the moon is possible, but not at certain other times. A case, in fact, is recorded where a man reached the moon, but had to wait till communication was re-established by the approach of the satellite to its primary before he could return. The 7 subdivisions fall naturally into 3 groups: A, the 7th or lowest, B, the 6th, 5th and 4th, and C, the 3rd, 2nd and 1st. The difference between members of one group may be compared to that between two solids, e.g., steel and sand. The difference between the groups may be compared to that between a solid and a liquid. Subplane 7 has the physical world as its background, though only a distorted and partial view of it is visible, since all that is light and good and beautiful seems invisible. 4,000 years ago the scribe Ani described it in an Egyptian papyrus thus: "What manner of place is this unto which I have come? It hath no water, it hath no air, it is deep, unfathomable, it is black as the blackest night, and men wander helplessly about therein. In it a man may not live in quietness of heart." For the unfortunate human being on that level it is indeed true that all the earth is full of darkness and cruel habitation, but it is darkness which radiates from within himself and causes his existence to be passed in a perpetual night of evil and horror, a very real hell, though, like all other hells, entirely of man's own creation. Most students find the investigation of this section an extremely unpleasant task, for there appears to be a sense of density and gross materiality about it which is indescribably loathsome to the liberated astral body, causing it the sense of pushing its way through some black, viscous fluid, while the inhabitants and the influences encountered there are also usually exceedingly undesirable. The ordinary decent man would probably have little to detain him on the seventh subplane, the only persons who would normally awake to consciousness on that subplane being those whose desires are gross and brutal, drunkards, sensualists, violent criminals, and the like. Subplanes 6, 5, and 4 have for their background the physical world with which we are familiar. Life on number 6 is like ordinary physical life, minus the physical body and its necessities. Numbers 5 and 4 are less material and more withdrawn from the lower world and its interests. As in the case of the physical, the densest astral matter is far too dense for the ordinary forms of astral life, but the astral world has other forms of its own which are quite unknown to students of the surface. On the fifth and fourth subplanes, merely earthly associations appear to become of less and less importance, and the people there tend more and more to mold their surroundings into agreement with the more persistent of their thoughts. Subplanes 3, 2, and 1, though occupying the same space, give the impression of being further removed from the physical world and correspondingly less material. At these levels entities lose sight of the earth and its affairs, they are usually deeply self-absorbed, and to a large extent create their own surroundings, though these are sufficiently objective to be perceptible to other entities. They are thus little awake to the realities of the plane, but live instead in imaginary cities of their own, partly creating them entirely by their own thoughts, and partly inheriting and adding to the structures created by their predecessors. Here are found the happy hunting grounds of the Red Indian, the Valhalla of the Norseman, the houri-filled paradise of the Muslim, the golden and jeweled-gated New Jerusalem of the Christian, the Lyceum-filled heaven of the materialistic reformer. Here is also the Summerland of the spiritualists, in which exist houses, schools, cities, etc., which, real enough as they are for a time, to a clearer sight are sometimes pitiably unlike what their delighted creators suppose them to be. Nevertheless, many of the creations are of real though temporary beauty, and a visitor who knew of nothing higher might wander contentedly among the natural scenery provided, which at any rate is much superior to anything in the physical world, or he might, of course, prefer to construct his scenery to suit his own fancies. The second subplane is especially the habitat of the selfish or unspiritual religionist. Here he wears his golden crown and worships his own grossly material representation of the particular deity of his country and time. The first subplane is specially appropriated to those who during earth life have devoted themselves to materialistic but intellectual pursuits, following them not for the sake of benefiting their fellow men, but either from motives of selfish ambition or simply for the sake of intellectual exercise. Such persons may remain on this subplane for many years, happy in working out their intellectual problems, but doing no good to anyone, and making but little progress on their way towards the heaven world. On this, the atomic subplane, men do not build themselves imaginary conceptions, as they do at lower levels. Thinkers and men of science often utilize for purposes of their study almost all the powers of the entire astral plane, for they are able to descend almost to the physical along certain limited lines. Thus they can swoop down upon the astral counterpart of a, page 151, physical book and extract from it the information they require. They readily touch the mind of an author, impress their ideas upon him, and receive his in return. Sometimes they seriously delay their departure for the heaven world by the avidity with which they prosecute lines of study and experiment on the astral plane. Although we speak of astral matter as solid, it is never really, but only relatively solid. One of the reasons why medieval alchemists symbolized astral matter by water was because of its fluidity and penetrability. The particles in the densest astral matter are further apart, relatively to their size, than even gaseous particles. Hence it is easier for two of the densest astral bodies to pass through each other than it would be for the lightest gas to diffuse itself in the air. People on the astral plane can and do pass through one another constantly, and through fixed astral objects. There can never be anything like what we mean by a collision, and under ordinary circumstances two bodies which interpenetrate are not even appreciably affected. If, however, the interpenetration lasts for some time, as when two persons sit side by side in a church or theater, a considerable effect may be produced. If a man thought of a mountain as an obstacle, he could not pass through it. To learn that it is not an obstacle is precisely the object of one part of what is called the test of earth. An explosion on the astral plane might be temporarily as disastrous as an explosion of gunpowder on the physical plane, but the astral fragments would quickly collect themselves again. Thus there cannot be an accident on the astral plane in our sense of the word, because the astral body, being fluidic, cannot be destroyed or permanently injured, as the physical can. A purely astral object could be moved by means of an astral hand, if one wished, but not the astral counterpart of a physical object. In order to move an astral counterpart, it would be necessary to materialize a hand and move the physical object, then the astral counterpart would, of course, accompany it. The astral counterpart is there because the physical object is there, just as the scent of a rose fills a room because the rose is there. One could no more move a physical object by moving its astral counterpart than one could move the rose by moving its perfume. On the astral plane one never touches the surface of anything, so as to feel it hard or soft, rough or smooth, hot or cold, but on coming into contact with the interpenetrating substance one would be conscious of a different rate of vibration, which might, of course, be pleasant or unpleasant, stimulating or depressing. Thus if one is standing on the ground, part of one's astral body interpenetrates the ground under one's feet, but the astral body would not be conscious of the fact by anything corresponding to a sense of hardness or by any difference in the power of movement. On the astral plane one has not the sense of jumping over a precipice, but simply of floating over it. Although the light of all planes comes from the sun, yet the effect which it produces on the astral plane is entirely different from that on the physical. In the astral world there is a diffused luminosity, not obviously coming from any special direction. All astral matter is in itself luminous, though an astral body is not like a painted sphere, but rather a sphere of living fire. It is never dark in the astral world. The passing of a physical cloud in front of the sun makes no difference whatever to the astral plane, nor, of course, does the shadow of the earth which we call night. As astral bodies are transparent, there are no shadows. Atmospheric and climatic conditions make practically no difference to work on the astral and mental planes. But being in a big city makes a great difference, on account of the masses of thought forms. On the astral plane there are many currents which tend to carry about persons who are lacking in will, and even those who have will but do not know how to use it. There is no such thing as sleep in the astral world. It is possible to forget upon the astral plane just as it is on the physical. It is perhaps even easier to forget on the astral plane than on the physical because that world is so busy and so populous. Knowledge of a person in the astral world does not necessarily mean knowledge of him in the physical world. The astral plane has often been called the realm of illusion, not that it is itself any more illusory than the physical world, but because of the extreme unreliability of the impressions brought back from it by the untrained seer. This can be accounted for mainly by two remarkable characteristics of the astral world. 1. Many of its inhabitants have a marvelous power of changing their forms with protean rapidity, and also of casting practically unlimited glamour over those with whom they choose to sport, and 2. Astral sight is very different from and much more extended than physical vision. Thus with astral vision an object is seen, as it were, from all sides at once, every particle in the interior of a solid being as plainly open to the view as those on the outside, and everything entirely free from the distortion of perspective. If one looked at a watch astrally, one would see the face and all the wheels lying separately, but nothing on the top of anything else. Looking at a closed book one would see each page, not through all the other pages before or behind it, but looking straight down upon it as though it were the only page to be seen. It is easy to see that under such conditions even the most familiar objects may at first be totally unrecognizable, and that an inexperienced visitor may well find considerable difficulty in understanding what he really does see, and still more in translating his vision into the very inadequate language of ordinary speech. Yet a moment's consideration will show that astral vision approximates much more closely to true perception than does physical sight, which is subject to the distortions of perspective. In addition to these possible sources of error, matters are still further complicated by the fact that this astral sight cognizes forms of matter which, while still purely physical, are nevertheless invisible under ordinary conditions. Such, for example, are the particles composing the atmosphere, all the emanations which are continuously being given out by everything that has life, and also the 4 grades of etheric matter. Further, astral vision discloses to view other and entirely different colors beyond the limits of the ordinary visible spectrum, the ultrared and ultraviolet rays known to physical science being plainly visible to astral sight. Thus, to take a concrete example, a rock, seen with astral sight, is no mere inert mass of stone. With astral vision, 1. The whole of the physical matter is seen, instead of a very small part of it. 2. The vibrations of the physical particles are perceptible. 3. The astral counterpart, composed of various grades of astral matter, all in constant motion, is visible. 4. The universal life, prana, is seen to be circulating through it and radiating from it. 5. An aura will be seen surrounding it. 6. Its appropriate elemental essence is seen permeating it, ever active but ever fluctuating. In the case of the vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms, the complications are naturally much more numerous. A good instance of the sort of mistake that is likely to occur on the astral plane is the frequent reversal of any number which the seer has to record, so that he is liable to render, say, 139 as 931, and so on. In the case of a student of occultism trained by a capable master, such a mistake would be impossible, except through great hurry or carelessness, since such a pupil has to go through a long and varied course of instruction in this art of seeing correctly. A trained seer in time acquires a certainty and confidence in dealing with the phenomena of the astral plane far exceeding anything possible in physical life. It is quite a mistaken view to speak with scorn of the astral plane and to think it unworthy of attention. It would, of course, certainly be disastrous for any student to neglect his higher development, and to rest satisfied with the attainment of astral consciousness. In some cases it is indeed possible to develop the higher mental faculties first, to overleap the astral plane for the time, as it were. But this is not the ordinary method adopted by the masters of wisdom with their pupils. For most, progress by leaps and bounds is not practicable. It is necessary therefore to proceed slowly, step by step. In the voice of the silence 3 halls are spoken of. The first, that of ignorance, is the physical plane. The second, the hall of learning, is the astral plane, and is so called because the opening of the astral chakrams reveals so much more than is visible on the physical plane that the man feels he is much nearer the reality of the thing. Nevertheless it is still but the place of probationary learning. Still more real and definite knowledge is acquired in the hall of wisdom, which is the mental plane. An important part of the scenery of the astral plane consists of what are often, though mistakenly, called the records of the astral light. These records, which are in truth a sort of materialization of the divine memory, a living photographic representation of all that has ever happened, are really and permanently impressed upon a very much higher level, and are only reflected in a more or less spasmodic manner on the astral plane, so that one whose power of vision does not rise above this will be likely to obtain only occasional and disconnected pictures of the past instead of a coherent narrative. But nevertheless, these reflected pictures of all kinds of past events are constantly being reproduced in the astral world, and form an important part of the surroundings of the investigator there. Communication on the astral plane is limited by the knowledge of the entity, just as it is in the physical world. One who is able to use the mind-body can communicate his thoughts to the human entities there more readily and rapidly than on Earth, by means of mental impressions, but the ordinary inhabitants of the astral plane are not usually able to exercise this power. They appear to be restricted by limitations similar to those that prevail on Earth, though perhaps less rigid. Consequently, as previously mentioned, they are found associating, there as here, in groups drawn together by common sympathies, beliefs, and language. Chapter 17. Miscellaneous Astral Phenomena. There is reason to suppose that it may not be long before some applications of one or two superphysical forces may come to be known to the world at large. A common experience at spiritualistic seances is that of the employment of practically resistless force in, for example, the instantaneous movement of enormous weights, and so on. There are several ways in which such results may be brought about. Hints may be given as to 4 of these. 1. There are great etheric currents on the surface of the earth flowing from pole to pole in volumes which make this power as irresistible as that of the rising tide, and there are methods by which this stupendous force may be safely utilized, though unskillful attempts to control it would be fraught with the greatest danger. 2. There is an etheric pressure, somewhat corresponding to, though immensely greater than, the atmospheric pressure. Practical occultism teaches how a given body of ether can be isolated from the rest, so that the tremendous force of etheric pressure can be brought into play. 3. There is a vast store of potential energy which has become dormant in matter during the involution of the subtle into the gross, and by changing the condition of the matter some of this may be liberated and utilized, somewhat as latent energy in the form of heat may be liberated by a change in the condition of visible matter. 4. Many results may be produced by what is known as sympathetic vibration. By sounding the keynote of the class of matter it is desired to affect, an immense number of sympathetic vibrations can be called forth. When this is done on the physical plane, e.g., by sounding a note on a harp and inducing other harps tuned in unison to respond sympathetically, no additional energy is developed. But on the astral plane the matter is far less inert, so that when called into action by sympathetic vibrations, it adds its own living force to the original impulse, which may thus be multiplied manyfold. By further rhythmic repetition of the original impulse, the vibrations may be so intensified that the result is out of all apparent proportion to the cause. There seems scarcely any limit to the conceivable achievements of this force in the hands of a great adept who fully comprehends its possibilities, for the very building of the universe itself was but the result of the vibration set up by the spoken word. The class of mantras or spells which produce their result not by controlling some elemental, but merely by the repetition of certain sounds, also depend for their efficacy upon this action of sympathetic vibration. The phenomenon of disintegration also may be brought about by the action of extremely rapid vibrations, which overcome the cohesion of the molecules of the object operated upon. A still higher vibration of a somewhat different type will separate these molecules into their constituent atoms. A body thus reduced to the etheric condition can be moved from one place to another with very great rapidity, and the moment the force which has been exerted is withdrawn it will be forced by the etheric pressure to resume its original condition. It is necessary to explain how the shape of an object is preserved when it is disintegrated and then rematerialized. If a metal key, for example, were raised to the vaporous condition by heat, when the heat is withdrawn the metal will solidify, but instead of being a key it will be merely a lump of metal. The reason of this is that the elemental essence which informs the, page 159, key would be dissipated by the alteration in its condition, not that the elemental essence can be affected by heat, but that when its temporary body is destroyed as a solid, the elemental essence pours back into the great reservoir of such essence, much as the higher principles of man, though entirely unaffected by heat or cold, are yet forced out of a physical body when the latter is destroyed by fire. Consequently, when the metal of the key cooled into the solid condition again, the earth elemental essence which poured back into it would not be the same as that which it contained before, and there would therefore be no reason why the key shape should be retained. But a man who disintegrated a key in order to move it from one place to another would be careful to hold the elemental essence in exactly the same shape until the transfer was completed, and then when his will force was removed it would act as a mold into which the solidifying particles would flow, or rather round which they would be reaggregated. Thus, unless the operator's power of concentration failed, the shape would be accurately preserved. Apports, or the bringing of objects almost instantaneously from great distances to spiritualistic seances are sometimes produced in this way, for it is obvious that when disintegrated they could be passed with perfect ease through any solid substance, such as the wall of a house or the side of a locked box. The passage of matter through matter is thus, when understood, as simple as the passage of water through a sieve or of a gas through a liquid. Materialization or the change of an object from the etheric to the solid state can be produced by a reversal of the above process. In this case also a continued effort of will is necessary to prevent the materialized matter from relapsing into the etheric condition. The various kinds of materialization will be described in Chapter 28 on Invisible Helpers. Electrical disturbances of any sort present difficulties in either materialization or disintegration, presumably for the same reason that bright light renders them almost impossible, the destructive effect of strong vibration. Reduplication is produced by forming a perfect mental image of the object to be copied, and then gathering about that mold the necessary astral and physical matter. The phenomenon requires considerable power of concentration to perform, because every particle, interior as well as exterior, of the object to be duplicated must be held accurately in view simultaneously. A person who is unable to extract the matter required directly from the surrounding ether may sometimes borrow it from the material of the original article, which would then be correspondingly reduced in weight. Precipitation of letters, etc., may be produced in several ways. An adept might place a sheet of paper before him, form a mental image of the writing he wished to appear upon it, and draw from the ether the matter wherewith to objectivize the image. Or he could with equal ease produce the same result upon a sheet of paper lying before his correspondent, whatever might be the distance between them. A third method, quicker and therefore more often adopted, is to impress the whole substance of the letter on the mind of some pupil and leave him to do the mechanical work of precipitation. The pupil would then imagine he saw the letter written on the paper in his master's hand, and objectivize the writing as just described. If he found it difficult to draw the material from the ether and precipitate the writing on the paper simultaneously, he might have ink or colored powder at hand on which he could draw more readily. It is just as easy to imitate one man's handwriting as another's, and it would be impossible to detect by any ordinary means a forgery committed in this manner. A pupil of a master has an infallible test which he can apply, but for others the proof of origin must lie solely in the contents of the letter and the spirit breathing through it, as the handwriting, however cleverly imitated, is valueless as evidence. A pupil new to the work would probably be able to imagine a few words at a time only, but one with more experience could visualize a whole page or even an entire letter at once. In this manner quite long letters are sometimes produced in a few seconds at spiritualistic seances. Pictures are precipitated in the same manner, except that here it is necessary to visualize the entire scene at once, and if many colors are needed they have to be manufactured, kept separate, and applied correctly. Evidently there is here scope for artistic faculty, and those with experience as artists will be more successful than those without such experience. Slate writing is sometimes produced by precipitation, though more frequently tiny points of spirit hands are materialized just sufficiently to grasp the fragment of pencil. Levitation, that is the floating of a human body in the air, is often performed at seances by spirit hands which support the body of the medium. It may also be achieved by the aid of the elementals of air and water. In the East, however, always, and here occasionally, another method is employed. There is known to occult science a method of neutralizing or even reversing the force of gravity, which is in fact of a magnetic nature, by means of which levitation may be easily produced. Doubtless this method was used in raising some of the airships of ancient India and Atlantis, and it is not improbable that a similar method was employed in constructing the pyramids and Stonehenge. Levitation also happens to some ascetics in India, and some of the greatest of Christian saints have in deep meditation been thus raised from the ground, for example, S. Teresa and S. Joseph of Cupertino. Since light consists of ether vibrations, it is obvious that anyone who understands how to set up these vibrations can produce spirit lights, either the mildly phosphorescent or the dazzling electrical variety, or those dancing globules of light into which a certain class of fire elementals so readily transform themselves. The feat of handling fire without injury may be performed by covering the hand with the thinnest layer of etheric substance, so manipulated as to be impervious to heat. There are also other ways in which it may be done. The production of fire is also within the resources of the astral plane, as well as to counteract its effect. There seem to be at least 3 ways in which this could be done. 1. To set up and maintain the requisite rate of vibration, when combustion must ensue. 2. To introduce fourth-dimensionally a tiny fragment of glowing matter and then blow upon it until it bursts into flame. 3. To introduce chemical constituents which would produce combustion. The transmutation of metals can be achieved by reducing a piece of metal to the atomic condition and rearranging the atoms in another form. Repercussion, which will be dealt with in the chapter on invisible helpers, is also due to the principle of sympathetic vibration, described above. Chapter 18. The Fourth Dimension. There are many characteristics of the astral world which agree with remarkable exactitude with a world of 4 dimensions, as conceived by geometry and mathematics. So close, in fact, is this agreement, that cases are known where a purely intellectual study of the geometry of the 4th dimension has opened up astral sight in the student. The classic books on the subject are those of C. H. Hinton, Scientific Romances, Volumes 1 and 2, A New Era of Thought, The Fourth Dimension. These are strongly recommended by C. W. Leadbeater, who states that the study of the 4th dimension is the best method he knows to obtain a conception of the conditions which prevail on the astral plane, and that C. H. Hinton's exposition of the 4th dimension is the only one which gives any kind of explanation down here of the constantly observed facts of astral vision. Other, and later books are several by Claude Bragdon, The Beautiful Necessity, A Primer of Higher Space, 4th Dimensional Vistas, etc., Tertium Organum, a most illuminating work, by P. D. Ouspensky, and no doubt many others. For those who have made no study of this subject, we may give here the very barest outline of some of the main features underlying the 4th dimension. A point, which has position but no magnitude, has no dimensions. A line, created by the movement of a point, has 1 dimension, length. A surface, created by the movement of a line, at right angles to itself, has 2 dimensions, length and breadth. A solid, created by the movement of a surface at right angles to itself, has 3 dimensions, length, breadth and thickness. A tesseract is a hypothetical object, created by the movement of a solid, in a new direction at right angles to itself, having 4 dimensions, length, breadth, thickness and another, at right angles to these 3, but incapable of being represented in our world of 3 dimensions. Many of the properties of a tesseract can be deduced, according to the following table. Properties of a tesseract: points, lines, surfaces, solids. A point has 1. A line has 2, 1. A 4-sided surface has 4, 4, 1. A cube has 8, 12, 6, 1. A tesseract has 16, 32, 24, 8. The tesseract, as described by C. H. Hinton, is stated by C. W. Leadbeater to be a reality, being quite a familiar figure on the astral plane. In some occult experiences by J. Van Manen, an attempt is made to represent a 4-dimensional globe graphically. There is a close and suggestive parallel between phenomena which could be produced by means of a three-dimensional object in a hypothetical world of two dimensions inhabited by a being conscious only of two dimensions, and many astral phenomena as they appear to us living in the physical or three-dimensional world. Thus, 1. Objects, by being lifted through the third dimension, could be made to appear in or disappear from the two-dimensional world at will. 2. An object completely surrounded by a line could be lifted out of the enclosed space through the third dimension. 3. By bending a two-dimensional world, represented by a sheet of paper, two distant points could be brought together, or even made to coincide, thus destroying the two-dimensional conception of distance. 4. A right-handed object could be turned over through the third dimension and made to reappear as a left-handed object. 5. By looking down, from the third dimension, onto a two-dimensional object, every point of the latter could be seen at once, and free from the distortion of perspective. To a being limited to a conception of two dimensions, the above would appear miraculous, and completely incomprehensible. It is curious that precisely similar tricks can be and are constantly being played upon us, as is well known to spiritualists. 1. Entities and objects appear and disappear. 2. Apports of articles from great distances are made. 3. Articles are removed from closed boxes. 4. Space appears to be practically annihilated. 5. An object can be reversed, i.e., a right hand turned into a left hand. 6. All parts of an object, example, of a cube, are seen simultaneously and free from all distortion of perspective. Similarly, the whole of the matter of a closed book can be seen at once. The explanation of the welling up of force, example, in chakrams, apparently from nowhere, is of course that it comes from the fourth dimension. A liquid, poured onto a surface, tends to spread itself out in two dimensions, becoming very thin in the third dimension. Similarly, a gas tends to spread itself in three dimensions, and it may be that in so doing it becomes smaller in the fourth dimension, i.e., the density of a gas may be a measure of its relative thickness in the fourth dimension. It is clear that there is no need to stop at 4 dimensions. For all we know, there may be infinite dimensions of space. At any rate, it seems certain that the astral world is 4-dimensional, the mental 5-dimensional, and the Buddhic 6-dimensional. It should be clear that if there are, say, 7 dimensions at all, there are 7 dimensions always and everywhere, i.e., there is no such thing as a third or fourth dimensional being. The apparent difference is due to the limited power of perception of the entity concerned, not to any change in the objects perceived. This idea is very well worked out in Tertium Organum by Ouspensky. Nevertheless, a man may develop astral consciousness and still be unable to perceive or appreciate the fourth dimension. In fact, it is certain that the average man does not perceive the fourth dimension at all when he enters the astral plane. He realizes it only as a certain blurring, and most men go through their astral lives without discovering the reality of the fourth dimension in the matter surrounding them. Entities, such as nature spirits, which belong to the astral plane, have by nature the faculty of seeing the four-dimensional aspect of all objects, but even they do not see them perfectly, since they perceive only the astral matter in them and not the physical, just as we perceive the physical and not the astral. The passage of an object through another does not raise the question of the fourth dimension, but may be brought about by disintegration, a purely three-dimensional method. Time is not in reality the fourth dimension at all, yet to regard the problem from the point of view of time is some slight help towards understanding it. The passage of a cone through a sheet of paper would appear to an entity living on the sheet of paper as a circle altering in size. The entity would of course be incapable of perceiving all the stages of the circle as existing together as parts of one cone. Similarly, for us the growth of a solid object viewed from the Buddhic plane corresponds to the view of the cone as a whole, and thus throws some light on our own delusion of past, present and future, and on the faculty of provision. The transcendental view of time is very well treated in C. H. Hinton's story Stella, which is included in Scientific Romances, Volume 2. There are also 2 interesting references to this conception in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 69, and Volume 2, page 466. It is an interesting and significant observation that geometry as we have it now is but a fragment, an exoteric preparation for the esoteric reality. Having lost the true sense of space, the first step towards that knowledge is the cognition of the fourth dimension. We may conceive the monad at the beginning of its evolution to be able to move and to see in infinite dimensions, one of these being cut off at each downward step, until for the physical brain consciousness only 3 are left. Thus by involution into matter we are cut off from the knowledge of all but a minute part of the worlds which surround us, and even what is left is but imperfectly seen. With four-dimensional sight it may be observed that the planets which are isolated in our 3 dimensions are four-dimensionally joined, these globes being in fact the points of petals which are part of one great flower, hence the Hindu conception of the solar system as a lotus. There is also, via a higher dimension, a direct connection between the heart of the sun and the center of the earth, so that elements appear in the earth without passing through what we call the surface. A study of the fourth dimension seems to lead the way direct to mysticism. Thus C. H. Hinton constantly uses the phrase, casting out the self, pointing out that in order to appreciate a solid four-dimensionally it is necessary to regard it not from any one point of view but from all points of view simultaneously, i.e., the self, or particular, isolated point of view must be transcended and replaced by the general and unselfish viewpoint. One is also reminded of the famous saying of St. Paul, Ephesians, pages 17 to 18, that ye, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, and length, and depth and height. Chapter 19. Astral Entities, Human. To enumerate and describe every kind of astral entity would be a task as formidable as that of enumerating and describing every kind of physical entity. All we can attempt here is to tabulate the chief classes and give a very brief description of each. In order to make the classification quite complete, it is necessary to state that, in addition to the above, very high adepts from other planets of the solar system, and even more august visitors from a still greater distance, occasionally appear, but although it is possible, it is almost inconceivable, that such beings would ever manifest themselves on a plane as low as the astral. If they wished to do so they would create a temporary body of astral matter of this planet. Secondly, there are also 2 other great evolutions evolving on this planet, though it appears not to be intended that they or men should ordinarily be conscious of each other. If we did come into contact with them it would probably be physically, their connection with our astral plane being very slight. The only possibility of their appearance depends upon an extremely improbable accident in ceremonial magic, which only a few of the most advanced sorcerers know how to perform. Nevertheless, this has actually happened at least once. The human class, A. Physically alive. 1. The ordinary person. This class consists of persons, whose physical bodies are asleep, and who float about on the astral plane, in various degrees of consciousness, as already fully described in Chapter 9 on Sleep Life. 2. The psychic. A psychically developed person will usually be perfectly conscious when out of the physical body, but, for want of proper training, he is liable to be deceived as to what he sees. Often he may be able to range through all the astral subplanes, but sometimes he is especially attracted to some one subplane, and rarely travels beyond its influences. His recollection of what he has seen may of course vary from perfect clearness to utter distortion or black oblivion. As he is assumed not to be under the guidance of a master, he will appear always in his astral body, since he does not know how to function in his mental vehicle. 3. The adept and his pupils. This class usually employs, not the astral body, but the mind body, which is composed of matter of the 4 lower levels of the mental plane. The advantage of this vehicle is that it permits of instant passage from the mental to the astral and back, and also allows of the use at all times of the greater power and keener sense of its own plane. The mind-body not being visible to astral sight, the pupil who works in it learns to gather round himself a temporary veil of astral matter, when he wishes to become perceptible to astral entities. Such a vehicle, though an exact reproduction of the man in appearance, contains none of the matter of his own astral body, but corresponds to it in the same way as a materialization corresponds to a physical body. At an earlier stage of his development, the pupil may be found functioning in his astral body like anyone else, but, whichever vehicle he is employing, a pupil under a competent teacher is always fully conscious and can function easily upon all the subplanes. 4. The Black Magician and his pupils. This class corresponds somewhat to that of the adept and his pupils, except that the development has been for evil instead of good, the powers acquired being used for selfish instead of for altruistic purposes. Among its lower ranks are Negroes who practice the rites of the Obeah and Voodoo schools, and the medicine men of savage tribes. Higher in intellect, and therefore more blameworthy, are the Tibetan Black Magicians. The human class. B. Physically dead. 1. The ordinary person after death. This class, obviously a very large one, consists of all grades of persons, in varying conditions of consciousness, as already fully described in chapters 12 to 15 on after-death life. 2. The shade. In chapter 23 we shall see that when the astral life of a person is over, he dies on the astral plane and leaves behind him his disintegrating astral body, precisely as when he dies physically he leaves behind him a decaying physical corpse. In most cases the higher ego is unable to withdraw from his lower principles the whole of his monastic, mental, principle. Consequently, a portion of his lower mental matter remains entangled with the astral corpse. The portion of mental matter thus remaining behind consists of the grosser kinds of each subplane, which the astral body has succeeded in wrenching from the mental body. This astral corpse, known as a shade, is an entity which is not in any sense the real individual at all, nevertheless it bears his exact personal appearance, possesses his memory, and all his little idiosyncrasies. It may therefore very readily be mistaken for him, as indeed it frequently is at séances. It is not conscious of any act of impersonation, for as far as its intellect goes it must necessarily suppose itself to be the individual. It is in reality merely a soulless bundle of all his lowest qualities. The length of life of a shade varies according to the amount of the lower mental matter which animates it, but as this is steadily fading out, its intellect is a diminishing quantity, though it may possess a great deal of a certain sort of animal cunning, and even quite towards the end of its career it is still able to communicate by borrowing temporary intelligence from the medium. From its very nature it is exceedingly liable to be swayed by all kinds of evil influences, and, being separated from its higher ego, it has nothing in its constitution capable of responding to good ones. It therefore lends itself readily to various minor purposes of